Rain poured down on Blackwater like gunshots in the night that Selene Vale realized her ex-boyfriend would kill her tonight. The apartment was a mess of shattered glass, blood stained the kitchen counter, and Damon Crowe, the man who had trapped her in a spiral of violence for 3 years, had just locked the door. But she had managed to send one message, and 17 minutes later, the entire neighborhood lost power. A convoy of black armored vehicles silently rolled into the downpour. Stepping out wasn't a police officer. It was Rome Lazaro, the most fearsome mafia boss on the East Coast, and Celine's childhood best friend. This story will change everything you think about love, survival, and loyalty. Watch until the end, hit like, and comment with the name of the city you're watching in so I know how far this story has come. The rain didn't fall in Blackwater City. It attacked. Sheets of dirty water hammered the cracked sidewalks of Greystone Heights, flooding the gutters with cigarette butts and fast food wrappers, turning the narrow streets into shallow rivers that reflected the dying neon signs above. The whole neighborhood smelled like wet concrete and rotting garbage. Somewhere below the elevated train tracks, a stray dog howled at nothing, and the sound carried through the rain like a warning nobody was awake to hear. Apartment 4C at 1187. Parker Avenue sat at the end of a hallway that hadn't seen fresh paint since the building was condemned and then mysteriously uncondemned 6 years ago. The carpet was stained in ways that suggested histories no tenant wanted to investigate. The fluorescent light above the stairwell buzzed and flickered with the patience of something slowly dying. Inside 4C, Selene Vale pressed her back against the bedroom wall and tried not to breathe too loudly. The apartment was destroyed. The coffee table lay on its side, one leg snapped clean off. Broken glass from a shattered picture frame glittered across the kitchen tile like scattered teeth. A chair had been thrown into the bathroom door hard enough to crack the wood down the center. Blood, her blood, smeared in a thin arc across the edge of the kitchen counter where her head had connected with the granite 20 minutes ago. She could feel the cut above her left eyebrow pulsing with each heartbeat. The blood warm and sticky as it ran down her temple and pooled in the hollow of her collarbone. Her ribs screamed with every shallow breath. She'd cracked at least one, maybe two. She knew what cracked ribs felt like because she was an ER nurse, and she knew because this wasn't the first time. Across the apartment, Damon Crowe paced. He moved like something caged, back and forth between the kitchen and the living room window, his boots crunching over broken glass, his breath ragged and reeking of bourbon, even from 10 feet away. His knuckles were split and bleeding. His eyes were bloodshot and wild, the pupils blown wide in a way that told Selene it wasn't just alcohol anymore. He'd been doing lines in the bathroom before the fight started. She'd found the residue on the sink when she came home from her shift, and when she mentioned it, not even an accusation, just a quiet observation, he'd grabbed her by the throat and thrown her into the kitchen counter. 3 years. 3 years of this exact cycle. The first time Damon hit her, he cried afterward, sobbed into her lap like a child, and swore it would never happen again. He bought roses the next day, took her to dinner at a place they couldn't afford, made love to her so gently she almost convinced herself it had been an accident, a momentary loss of control from a man carrying too much pain. The second time there were no roses, just a muttered apology and a week of silence followed by another round of charm so practiced it felt rehearsed, because it was. By the 10th time, the 12th, the 20th, she'd stopped counting. Selene had memorized the choreography of her own abuse. The tension phase, the explosion, the honeymoon. Each cycle shorter than the last, the explosions more violent, the honeymoons thinner and more transparent until they were nothing more than a few hours of Damon not screaming before the whole thing started again. She stayed because leaving was more complicated than anyone who'd never been inside it could understand. She stayed because he knew where her mother lived in the care facility upstate. She stayed because he'd once held a lit cigarette an inch from her sleeping face and whispered that if she ever packed a bag, he'd make sure she didn't have a face worth running with. But tonight was different. She could feel it in the way he moved. There was a new frequency to his desperation, a vibrating intensity that went beyond the usual drunk rage. Something had happened before she came home, something bad. "Where's my phone?" Damon stopped pacing and turned toward her. His voice was too calm. The dangerous kind of calm. "Where the hell did you put my phone, Selene? I didn't touch your phone." "Don't lie to me." He crossed the room in 3 fast strides, and she flinched back against the wall so hard her shoulder blades ached. He leaned close enough that she could smell the bourbon on his breath, the chemical sweat seeping through his shirt. Victor called 3 times today. 3 times. And I missed every goddamn call because my phone was dead, and now he thinks I'm ducking him. Victor. Selene knew the name the way you know the name of a disease you're trying to avoid. Victor Volkov. Damon had been doing something with his people. She never knew the details, and she never wanted to. But she understood enough to know it involved money and the kind of men who solved problems with violence, not lawyers. Damon, I was at work all day. I didn't. He grabbed her jaw. Not a slap, not a punch. Worse. He squeezed, his thumb pressing into the soft tissue beneath her chin until her vision blurred and she tasted copper. His face was inches from hers, and she could see the brokenness behind his rage, the animal terror of a man who'd gotten in over his head with people who didn't forgive mistakes. You think you can leave me? He hissed through clenched teeth. Is that what you're planning? Because if I go down, Selene, look at me. If I go down, you're coming with me. Do you understand? She nodded because that was what kept her alive. Agreement, submission, the careful performance of compliance that had become her nightly survival strategy. He shoved her away and resumed pacing. His hands trembled as he ran them through his hair. Whatever was happening with the Volkov people had him scared in a way she'd never seen before, and a scared Damon was infinitely more dangerous than an angry one. Selene slid down the wall slowly, sitting on the floor with her knees pulled up to her chest. Her vision swam. She pressed her palm against her bruised ribs and breathed in shallow sips of air, each inhale a knife twisting between her bones. Her phone. She felt it before she remembered. The hard edge of her phone pressing against her thigh through her scrub pants. It had slipped between the couch cushions during the first shove, and she'd grabbed it silently while Damon was in the bathroom screaming at his reflection. She'd slid it into her pocket when his back was turned, the way a prisoner hides contraband. Now, with Damon pacing near the window and muttering to himself about Victor and wire transfers and encrypted files, Selene eased the phone from her pocket with fingers that shook so badly she nearly dropped it twice. She didn't call 911. She'd called 911 before. Twice. Both times, the officers who arrived seemed more annoyed than concerned. Both times, Damon charmed them at the door, while Selene stood behind him with her hand covering the bruise on her arm. Both times, nothing happened. She scrolled to a contact she hadn't messaged in over a year. A number she kept in her phone the way someone keeps an emergency flare in the trunk of a car, not expecting to use it, but knowing that when you needed it, nothing else would work. She typed 3 words. Can you come get me? Her thumb hovered over the send button. She could hear her own heartbeat in her ears, could feel the blood from her cut dripping onto the screen. Damon was at the window now, pulling back the curtain to stare into the rain like he expected someone to be watching from the street below. She pressed send. The reply came in 11 seconds. Location? No questions. No, what's wrong? No, are you okay? Just 1 word. Direct, surgical. She typed the address and hit send again. Then she killed the screen, slid the phone back into her pocket, and pressed her forehead against her knees as the rain battered the windows, and Damon's pacing grew faster and more erratic, and the apartment felt like a cage being slowly lowered into water. 17 minutes. She didn't know why she was counting. She didn't know what she expected to happen. But some part of her, the part that still remembered being 12 years old on the roof of a foster home, sharing stolen candy with a boy who never smiled but always showed up, that part knew. He would come. He always did. At the 14-minute mark, Damon's phone buzzed. He snatched it from the kitchen counter and read the screen, and whatever he saw drained the color from his face. He stared at the phone for a long time, his jaw working silently, his chest rising and falling in rapid, shallow bursts. No, he muttered. No, no, no. He turned to Selene with a look she had never seen on his face before. Not rage, not cruelty, pure terror. What did you do? His voice cracked. Selene, who did you call? I didn't call anyone. He crossed the room and grabbed her by the arms, hauling her to her feet and shaking her hard enough that her teeth clacked together. Don't lie to me. Who did you call? Was it Victor? Did you call the police? Who knows about the files? I don't know what you're talking about. The files, Selene. The medical servers. The crypto wallets. Who did you... At the 16-minute mark, the power went out. Not just in the apartment. Not just in the building. The entire block went dark. Every streetlight. Every neon sign. Every flickering window and every condemned building on Harker Avenue died simultaneously, as if someone had reached down and pulled the plug on the whole neighborhood. The only light left was the distant glow of downtown Blackwater, miles away across the river, shimmering through the rain like a mirage. Damon released her and backed toward the kitchen counter. His breathing was rapid and shallow. In the sudden dark, Selene could hear his hand fumbling through a drawer, the scrape of metal, the click of a safety being thumbed off. He had a gun. She'd always known about the gun, a black 9mm he kept in the kitchen drawer beneath the takeout menus. Loaded, always loaded. "Stay behind me," he whispered, and his voice had changed completely. The bully was gone. In his place was something smaller and younger and badly frightened. "Don't move. Don't make a sound." Selene pressed herself against the wall and stared into the darkness. Rain hammered the windows. Somewhere outside, an engine idled, low and heavy, the deep mechanical purr of something built for armored transport, not city driving. Then another engine, and another. Through the rain-streaked window, she saw them. 3 black SUVs, moving in formation through the flooded street below with their headlights off. They rolled to a stop in front of the building entrance, perfectly spaced, and the engines died in unison. Silence. Then doors opening. Multiple doors opening and closing with the quiet discipline of men who had done this exact thing many times before. Damon backed away from the window. His gun hand was shaking so badly the weapon rattled faintly in the dark. "Oh God," he said. "Oh God, that's not Victor's people." Heavy footsteps in the stairwell. Multiple sets of footsteps climbing steadily, the sound amplified by the narrow concrete walls. No voices, no radios. Just boots on stairs, rhythmic and unhurried. The cadence of men who didn't need to rush because they already knew exactly what they'd find at the top. They stopped outside the door of 4C. Silence again. Long enough for Selene to count 3 heartbeats. Then a knock. One knock. Calm and controlled. A single closed fist against the hollow door, polite as a neighbor asking to borrow sugar. But the restraint in that knock was what made it terrifying. It was the knock of someone who could have kicked the door off its hinges and chose not to. Damon raised the gun with both hands. "Who's there?" His voice came out thin and cracked. "I have a weapon. I'll shoot through the door. I swear I'll..." "Open it." 2 words, spoken from the hallway in a voice so flat, so completely emptied of emotion that it sounded like weather. Not a threat, not a warning. A statement of atmospheric fact delivered with the calm certainty of a man describing something that was going to happen regardless of whether anyone agreed. Selene's breath caught. She knew that voice. She hadn't heard it in over a year, longer maybe, but it landed in her chest with the weight of a decade of shared history, 100 stolen afternoons on concrete rooftops, 1,000 small kindnesses exchanged between 2 kids who had nothing but each other. Rome. Damon must have seen something change in her face, because he turned toward her in the dark, the gun swinging wildly between the door and her silhouette. "You know who that is?" he whispered. "You called him. You called him, you stupid..." The door opened, not kicked in, not broken down. It swung open slowly, the lock disengaging with a mechanical click that suggested someone on the other side had a key, or something better than a key, and the hallway light, powered by a generator maybe, because the rest of the block was still dark, spilled into the apartment in a thin wedge of cold white. Rome Lazaro stood in the doorway. He was 31 years old, 6'2", built lean and hard in the way that comes from years of violence rather than vanity. He wore a black overcoat that reached past his knees, tailored close across the shoulders, soaked through with rain. His face was angular, sharp-boned, the jaw set in a line that looked like it had been carved for the specific purpose of not showing emotion. Dark eyes, short-cropped hair, a thin scar along his left temple from something that had happened a long time ago in a place he never talked about. Behind him, filling the hallway like a wall of silent intent, stood 6 men in matching black. Each of them was armed. Each of them was motionless. Rainwater dripped from their shoulders onto the stained carpet, forming small dark pools around their polished boots. Damon raised the gun. "You have 10 seconds," Rome said, "to move away from her." His tone hadn't changed. He could have been reading a parking sign. His eyes moved once across the apartment, registering the broken furniture, the blood on the counter, the shattered glass on the floor, and then settled on Selene's face, on the cut above her eyebrow, on the bruise already darkening along her jaw. Something shifted behind his expression. It was small. Someone who didn't know him would have missed it entirely. But Selene saw it. A flicker in those flat, dark eyes, like a pilot light catching somewhere deep inside a furnace. And she understood that Damon Crowe had approximately 10 seconds to make the most important decision of his miserable life. Damon laughed. It was a high, brittle sound, the laugh of a man standing at the edge of a cliff and looking down. "You think you can walk into my apartment? You think you can just—" He jabbed the gun toward Selene without looking at her, his eyes locked on Rome. "She's mine. We're together. This is a domestic situation and you have no right—" 8 seconds. "I'll shoot her." Damon's voice broke. He grabbed Selene by the hair and yanked her in front of him, pressing the barrel of the gun against her temple. She gasped. The metal was cold and it trembled against her skin with the frequency of Damon's panic. "I'll kill her right here. Back up. Tell your men to back up." Rome didn't move. His hands stayed at his sides. His breathing didn't change. He looked at Selene, not at the gun, not at Damon, but at her. And in that look was something she hadn't seen directed at her in a very long time. Not pity, not rescue fantasy heroism, recognition. The look of someone who sees you, the actual you, behind the blood and the fear and the years of damage. "Selene." His voice was quiet. "Close your eyes." She closed them. What happened next took less than 2 seconds. She heard movement, impossibly fast, a displacement of air that didn't match anything a human body should have been able to do at that speed. She felt Damon's grip on her hair release as his body jerked sideways. Then a sound like a car backfiring inside a concrete room, so loud it turned her hearing into a single high-pitched whine. When she opened her eyes, Damon was on the floor. He was screaming, a raw animal sound, his hands clutching his right knee where the kneecap used to be. Blood was already pooling beneath him, spreading across the tile in a dark, expanding circle. His gun was 6 feet away, skidding to a stop against the overturned coffee table. Rome stood over him. His own weapon, a matte black pistol that seemed to have materialized from nowhere, hung at his side, barrel still trailing a thin wisp of smoke. He hadn't fired from the doorway. He'd closed the distance, disarmed the shot, redirected Selene's body, and fired into Damon's knee in a single fluid sequence that was less combat than choreography. He looked down at Damon with an expression of absolute nothing. No satisfaction, no anger, no mercy. The blankness of a man who had done worse things to better people and felt nothing about any of it. Then he turned to Selene. She was shaking. Her whole body trembled with a violence that started somewhere in her chest and radiated outward until even her fingertips vibrated. The cut above her eye was still bleeding. Her ribs were on fire. She could feel the adrenaline crashing through her system, turning her muscles to water and her thoughts to static. Rome shrugged off his overcoat, the $1,000 rain-soaked tailored coat that probably cost more than her monthly rent, and wrapped it around her shoulders. The weight of it steadied her. The warmth of it, the residual heat from his body still trapped in the fabric, broke something loose inside her chest that she'd been holding together with wire and willpower for 3 years. She didn't cry. She didn't collapse. She just stood there, wrapped in his coat, and breathed for the first time in what felt like years. "Can you walk?" he asked. She nodded. He placed one hand on the small of her back, light, barely there, more guidance than support, and led her toward the door. Behind them, 2 of his men moved silently into the apartment. One secured Damon's weapon, the other knelt beside him, not to help, but to ensure he didn't bleed out before they decided what to do with him. The hallway was quiet. The other tenants, if any were home, had sealed themselves behind their doors the moment the SUVs arrived. This was Greystone Heights. People here understood that certain sounds meant you stayed inside, stayed quiet, and forgot everything you heard by morning. Selene walked down the stairs on legs that felt borrowed from someone else. Rome stayed half a step behind her, close enough to catch her if she fell, far enough to give her the illusion of walking out under her own power. It was a small kindness, and it was calculated, and she recognized the calculation because she'd known him since they were children, and she knew that every single thing Rome Lazaro did was calculated, even the kindnesses, especially the kindnesses. Outside, the rain had softened to a steady drizzle. The black SUVs idled at the curb, their engines a low, synchronized hum. A man in a dark suit opened the rear door of the lead vehicle, and Rome gestured for Selene to get in. She paused at the door. "Where are we going?" "Somewhere safe." "That's not an answer." He looked at her. For the first time, something like a crack appeared in his composure. A micro-expression, gone almost before it registered, that might have been exhaustion or might have been the ghost of something he'd felt a long time ago on a rooftop in the Foster neighborhood where they'd both learned that safety was a thing that happened to other people. "My place," he said. "It's fortified. Volkov's people won't touch you there." She didn't ask how he knew about Volkov. She didn't ask why a man she hadn't spoken to in over a year dropped everything and arrived in 17 minutes with 6 armed soldiers and enough tactical precision to invade a small country. She would ask later. There would be time for questions later. Right now she was getting out. She climbed into the SUV. The leather seat was warm. The interior smelled like cedar and gun oil. Rome slid in beside her and closed the door, and the convoy began to move. 3 vehicles in tight formation, rolling through the dead streets of Greystone Heights with their headlights still off, navigating by instrument and instinct through a neighborhood that had never belonged to the law. Selene stared out the window as the flooded blocks slid past. Shuttered bodegas, condemned apartments, a playground with no swings, the chains cut off by someone who wanted the metal. She'd lived in this neighborhood for 3 years with Damon, and she'd never once felt like she belonged here, because belonging required a degree of choice she'd never been given. "How bad is it?" Rome's voice came from beside her, quiet, directed forward. She touched the cut above her eye. "I've seen worse." "That's not what I asked." She was quiet for a long time. "He's been getting worse," she said finally. "The last few months. Something's happening with the people he works for, the Volkov people. Money went missing or something went wrong, and he's—" She stopped, swallowed. "He's scared, Rome. I've never seen him scared before. He's been talking about encrypted files and crypto wallets and medical servers, and I don't know what any of it means, but whatever it is, it's eating him alive." Rome said nothing. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but he stayed silent, staring straight ahead through the tinted partition that separated them from the driver. His hands rested on his thighs, perfectly still. She noticed his knuckles, scarred, healed over, and rescarred. A topographic map of a life spent solving problems with his fists before he graduated to other methods. The convoy turned onto the expressway and accelerated. Through the rain-blurred windows, the Blackwater City skyline appeared on the horizon. Glass towers and construction cranes and the distant glow of the financial district where legitimate money washed itself clean every morning and got dirty again by noon. "Your ribs," Rome said. "How many?" "2, I think, maybe 3. I'll have a doctor waiting. I'm a nurse, I can—" "You're a patient tonight, not a nurse." She almost smiled at that. Almost. The penthouse was on the 62nd floor of a building called the Meridian, a residential tower in the Ironcliff district that catered to the kind of wealth that didn't appear on public tax records. The lobby was all marble and silence, and a concierge who looked at Rome's blood-speckled shirt without changing expression. A private elevator required 3 separate authentication codes before the doors opened. Inside the elevator, Selene caught her reflection in the polished metal wall and barely recognized the woman staring back. Split eyebrow crusted with dried blood, jaw swelling purple, eyes hollow with exhaustion. Rome's coat draped over her shoulders, so large it looked like she was disappearing into it. She looked like what she was, a survivor who wasn't sure she'd survived yet. The penthouse doors opened onto a space that felt like another planet. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealing the entire Blackwater skyline. Dark hardwood floors, minimalist furniture in blacks and grays, a kitchen larger than her entire apartment. Everything clean, everything controlled, everything precisely arranged by a man who ruled his personal space the way he ruled his empire, with absolute authority and no tolerance for disorder. A woman in a white coat was already waiting. The doctor. She was small, precise, and professional in a way that suggested she'd treated gunshot wounds in penthouses before and considered it part of a normal Thursday. "Follow me," the doctor said, and led Selene to a bedroom suite where she spent the next hour having her ribs wrapped, her cut cleaned and sealed with surgical adhesive, and her pupils checked for signs of concussion. Through the closed door, she could hear Rome on the phone. His voice was low, clipped, speaking in fragments she couldn't fully make out. She caught pieces. Volkov's chain. Hospital servers. She doesn't know what she has. That last phrase settled into her stomach like a cold stone. She doesn't know what she has. When the doctor left, Selene sat on the edge of the bed in borrowed clothes, a t-shirt and sweatpants that smelled like laundry detergent and absolutely nothing like Damon, and stared out the window at the city below. 62 floors up. The cars on the expressway looked like blood cells moving through an artery, red and white, pulsing along the dark veins of the city. Rome appeared in the doorway. He changed into a clean black shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbows. His forearms were roped with muscle and marked with small scars she didn't remember from before. He leaned against the doorframe with his arms crossed, and for a moment neither of them spoke. "Thank you," Selene said. "Don't." "I'm thanking you." "I heard you. I said don't." He pushed off the doorframe and walked to the window, standing with his back to her, staring at the city. "Thanking me implies I did you a favor. I didn't do you a favor. You called. I came. That's not a favor." "Then what is it?" He turned his head slightly, not enough to look at her, just enough to show the edge of that scar along his temple, the one he never explained. "A promise." She wanted to ask which promise. She wanted to say that promises between 12-year-olds sitting on a foster home roof didn't carry legal weight in the adult world of organized crime and domestic violence and crypto fraud. She wanted to remind him that they hadn't spoken in over a year, that the last time they saw each other she'd told him she couldn't be friends with a man who did what he did, that she'd walked away from him the same way she should have walked away from Damon, decisively, painfully, with the full knowledge that staying would destroy her. But she didn't say any of that. She was too tired, and the painkillers the doctor had given her were starting to soften the edges of everything, and the bed was warm, and for the first time in 3 years, nobody was going to hit her tonight. "Rome," she said quietly. "What did you mean on the phone? When you said, 'I don't know what I have'?" He turned fully now. His expression had closed again. That blank fortress face he showed the world. But his eyes were different, darker, heavier, like a man carrying something he wasn't ready to put down. "We'll talk about it in the morning." "No." She sat up straighter despite the pain in her ribs. "We'll talk about it now." He stared at her for a long moment. Then he crossed the room, pulled a chair to the side of the bed, and sat down with his elbows on his knees and his hands clasped together. "Damon has been laundering money for the Volkov syndicate," he said. "Cryptocurrency. Millions. He needed somewhere to hide the encrypted wallet files where nobody would think to look." "The hospital," Selene whispered. "The hospital, specifically the medical server system at Greystone Memorial. He embedded the wallet files inside patient imaging databases, MRI scans, CT data, diagnostic records, buried them in the metadata where no IT audit would ever think to search." Selene felt her stomach turn. "Those are patient files, protected health records. If anyone—" "It gets worse." Rome's voice was flat. "The access protocol he set up requires biometric verification. A fingerprint, one specific fingerprint." He paused. "Yours." The room went very quiet. "He used your badge access, your biometric login, whatever clearance you have to the hospital's secure imaging network. He built the entire encryption layer around it. Without your fingerprint, those files are inaccessible, permanently." Selene stared at him. The painkillers had evaporated. Every nerve in her body was singing with a sharp, clean clarity that felt like the opposite of safety. "How much money?" she asked. $37 million. She laughed. It came out broken and wrong, the kind of laugh that lives next door to screaming. "The Volkov syndicate wants their money," Rome continued, his eyes locked on hers. "Damon lost access when things went sideways with his contacts. Viktor Volkov believes the funds were stolen. He doesn't know the specifics of the biometric lock yet, but when he finds out, and he will find out, he won't send a process server. He'll send men. He'll send an army." Rome leaned back in the chair. And they won't just come for Damon. They'll come for you, because you're the only person on this planet who can unlock $37 million that a very dangerous man considers his property. Selene pressed her hands against her face. Her cracked ribs protested. She breathed through the pain, slow and deliberate, the way she taught patients to breathe in the ER when their world was falling apart, and the only thing left was oxygen. "So what do I do?" she asked through her fingers. Rome was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice carried something she hadn't heard in it before. Not cold command, not tactical calculation, something rawer, something that sounded almost like fear, although she knew he would have died before admitting it. "You stay here," he said. "You stay alive. And you let me figure out how to keep the Volkov syndicate from tearing this city apart to find you." Selene lowered her hands and looked at him. The boy from the rooftop was still in there, somewhere behind the scars and the tailored coats, and the empire built on blood. She could see him in the way Rome held his hands, clasped together, thumbs pressing against each other, the same anxious tick he'd had at 13 when the foster home got too loud and the only way to stay sane was to squeeze something until your knuckles turned white. "Rome," she said, "what happens if they find me?" He stood, straightened his sleeves, looked down at her with that blank, unreadable face that had terrified 1,000 men and never once frightened her. "They won't." He left the room and closed the door behind him. Selene lay back against the pillows and stared at the ceiling. 62 floors above, a city that was hunting her. Wrapped in borrowed clothes inside the fortress of a man who built his life on violence. Carrying a fingerprint worth $37 million to people who would cut off her hand to get it. Somewhere in the tower, a phone rang. She heard Rome answer, heard his voice go cold and sharp. The voice of the other Rome. The one she couldn't reach. The one the city feared. Outside the window, the rain had finally stopped. But across Blackwater City, in a warehouse on the industrial waterfront, a man named Viktor Volkov sat behind a steel desk, studying a photograph of a woman in hospital scrubs. He picked up his phone and dialed a number. "I know where the money is," he said. "Find the nurse." She didn't sleep. She tried. She lay flat on her back in the center of a bed that cost more than 6 months of her nursing salary, stared at a ceiling she couldn't see in the dark, and waited for unconsciousness to take her the way it used to when she was a child, and exhaustion was the only anesthetic available. Back then, she could sleep through anything: fire alarms, shouting matches in the hallway, the particular silence of a building where bad things were happening quietly behind closed doors. But she was 30 years old now, and her ribs were wrapped in medical tape, and somewhere in this city a man named Viktor Volkov had just learned she existed. She gave up on sleep at 4 in the morning. The penthouse was still. 2 of Rome's men stood near the elevator in the living room. She could see them through the cracked bedroom door, dark shapes against the glow of the city outside, motionless as furniture. She pulled on the borrowed sweatpants and padded to the kitchen, moving quietly the way you learn to move in apartments where waking a man meant consequences. The kitchen was stainless steel and dark granite, and the kind of quiet that expensive insulation buys. She found the coffee without opening more than 2 cabinets. Her hand shook slightly as she filled the carafe, less from fear now, and more from the specific tremor that followed an adrenaline crash, the body's overdue invoice for surviving something it wasn't designed to survive. She was standing at the window with a mug warming her palms when Rome appeared. He'd been awake. She could tell immediately, not because he looked tired, but because he didn't. Rome at 4 in the morning looked exactly like Rome at any other hour, contained, calibrated, eyes sharp and processing. Some people were most human when sleep-deprived. Rome looked most like himself, like the effort of appearing normal was a daytime performance he only kept up for company. He stopped when he saw her, looked at the coffee, looked at her face. "Sit down," he said. "I'm fine standing." "Your ribs aren't." She sat. He poured his own coffee, black, no hesitation, and leaned against the counter facing her. The city glowed behind him, orange and gray and infinite, 40 stories of glass and steel pressing against the window like it wanted in. "I need to go back to the hospital," Selene said. Rome's expression didn't change, which was its own kind of answer. "I have a shift in—" She checked the clock on the microwave. 6 hours. "I have patients. I have responsibilities that don't stop because Damon Crowe is an idiot who hid stolen money in a medical imaging server." You're not going back to the hospital. You don't get to tell me. The moment you badge into that building, you're broadcasting your location to every surveillance system Volkov's people have access to, and they have access to more than you think. He drank his coffee, set the mug down. I've already had someone call in sick for your shift. Selene stared at him. You called my job. I had someone call your job. There's a difference. There's absolutely not a difference. Rome, you can't just... I have a life. I have a career. You can't reorganize it because a criminal syndicate with a body count in the triple digits wants to find you? His voice didn't rise. It never rose. That was the thing about Rome. He didn't get louder when he was serious. He got quieter, each word more precisely placed, like a surgeon rather than a sledgehammer. The hospital is compromised. Your apartment is compromised. Your phone, give me your phone. She pulled it from her pocket. He crossed the kitchen in 3 steps, took it from her hand, and dropped it into a metal bowl on the counter that she now noticed was filled with what looked like water and salt. That was my phone. It was a tracking device Volkov's tech team has probably already flagged. You sent your location from it last night. She watched her phone die in the salted water and felt an absurd pang of grief for the photographs on it. 3 years of her life. Mostly photos of the hospital, her coworkers, the view from the ER break room window. Almost nothing from home, because home had been a place she stopped documenting. I need to call my mother, she said. Something shifted in Rome's face, almost imperceptible, but she caught it. Your mother's in Millbrook Care upstate. Damon knows the address. I know he knows the address. That's why I need to... It's handled. I have people there already. He said it the way you'd say the car's in the garage. Flat, factual, done. She's safe. She doesn't know anything is wrong. Selene set down her coffee mug with more force than she intended. It cracked against the granite but didn't break. You put guards on my mother without asking me. Yes. In the middle of the night. 4 hours ago. Because you decided... Because Damon Crow has been a Volkov asset for 18 months, Rome said. And now there was something in his voice that wasn't quite anger, but lived in the same building. Because he's been laundering their money through the hospital you work at using your biometric credentials, which means they already have a file on you. Your mother, your address, your schedule, your everything. He crossed the room and stood at the window, back to her, jaw tight. I didn't put guards on her to control you. I put guards on her because it was Tuesday night, and she was in a care facility in a building with 1 security guard and a broken front gate lock. The silence stretched. Outside, a helicopter crossed the skyline, its light blinking red and then gone. How long have you known about Damon? Selene asked. A pause. Small, but unmistakable. 6 weeks. She felt the floor tilt slightly under her feet, the particular vertigo of a betrayal you hadn't seen coming. 6 weeks. I became aware of his connection to Volkov's network 6 weeks ago. And you didn't tell me. I didn't know you were with him, not at first. By the time you what? She stood up, and her ribs punished her for it, and she ignored them. By the time you confirmed it, Rome? By the time you ran your due diligence and added it to whatever intelligence file you keep on people you used to know? Selene, how long have you known he was hitting me? The question landed in the room like something dropped from a height. Rome turned from the window. His face was closed, but his eyes were doing something complicated that she didn't have a name for yet. 3 weeks, he said. She'd been expecting him to say he didn't know. She'd been ready to argue with a denial, to force the admission out of him like pulling a splinter. The immediate, flat honesty of 3 weeks disarmed her completely. 3 weeks, she repeated. I found out through someone at the hospital, a colleague of yours. She was worried and she... He stopped, recalibrated. I had eyes on Damon for the money, not for you. When your name came up in connection to him, you started watching me too. He didn't answer, which was an answer. Selene pressed her fingers against her wrapped ribs and breathed through the pressure building behind her sternum. She wanted to be furious. She was furious. She was also standing in a man's kitchen at 4 a.m, alive, which was not a guaranteed outcome of the previous evening, and those two facts were difficult to hold simultaneously. You should have told me, she said. You would have tried to handle it yourself. That's my right. I know. His voice dropped a notch. Something in it roughened around the edges. I know it is. But I watched you walk out of that apartment building tonight with a split eyebrow and 3 cracked ribs, and He stopped, pressed his lips together. I should have told you. You're right. She looked at him for a long moment. Rome Lazaro admitting he was wrong was not a common occurrence. She'd seen him wrong twice in the 20-odd years she'd known him. Once when he was 14 and accused the wrong kid of stealing his jacket, and once when they were 19 and he told her that the life he was choosing wouldn't cost either of them anything. He'd been catastrophically wrong about that second one. Tell me everything, she said. About Damon, about Volkov, about the files, all of it. Right now, not in the morning. He studied her face for a moment, checking, she understood, whether she was asking from panic or from the precise, practical logic of someone who needed information to survive. When he found the answer he was looking for, he refilled both their coffees and sat down across from her. Viktor Volkov, he told her, had been running weapons through Blackwater City for 12 years. The operation was elegant in its structure. Cryptocurrency payments from international buyers, physical product moved through the port under cover of legitimate shipping manifests, and a layered money laundering network that cycled funds through real estate, private medical clinics, and most recently, a network of hospital billing systems across the Northeast. Damon had been recruited 18 months ago when he lost most of his legitimate business capital in the crypto collapse. He was smart enough to understand the system Volkov's accountants designed, and desperate enough not to ask too many questions. He built the biometric lock himself, an overcautious failsafe he installed without telling Volkov, intended to give himself leverage if the organization ever turned on him. It backfired spectacularly when Volkov's people discovered that $37 million in consolidated wallet funds was locked behind a fingerprint they didn't control. Victor doesn't know yet that it's my fingerprint, Selene said. Not yet. His tech people are still working backward through the encryption architecture. They'll find it. Days, not weeks. Then what? He sends someone to the hospital to grab me while I'm doing patient rounds? That's the optimistic scenario. She absorbed that. Set it down somewhere manageable. She'd spent 3 years learning to manage information about her own danger, and this was just more data, more weight to be distributed across the mental load she carried, like a backpack slowly filling with stones. And where does your operation sit in all of this? She asked. Rome's eyes went careful. What do you mean? I mean, you run half this city's criminal infrastructure. You've been watching Volkov's network for 6 weeks. You didn't call the police and you didn't move on him, which means you either can't or you won't. Which is it? The look he gave her was complicated, almost like respect. You're asking if I'm clean. I'm asking if you're clean relative to this specific situation. I'm not naive enough to ask if you're clean. A beat. Then, the Volkov syndicate has been moving weapons through territory I control, using ports that I have arrangements with. Arrangements that depend on a certain protocol being respected. His jaw worked. They violated that protocol without my knowledge. The operation you're tangled up in has been running inside my city without my sanction. So this is a turf issue. This is a business issue that became personal when I found out you were involved. In that order? He held her gaze. Don't push me on the order. She almost pushed him on the order. Instead, she drank her coffee and watched the city outside the window begin its slow surrender to dawn, the black sky turning the particular dark blue that preceded daylight in places where light pollution turned the horizon into a permanent artificial dusk. They sat in silence for a while, the kind of silence that wasn't uncomfortable exactly, but had weight to it. The accumulated density of 19 years of knowing each other in fragments, seeing each other across the gap that opened when their lives split in different directions. When she was 21, she'd told him she loved him. Standing in a parking garage in the west side, rain exactly like last night, both of them soaked and arguing about something she couldn't even remember now. She'd said it mid-fight, like an accusation, because that was how it felt, like a liability she'd discovered she was carrying. He'd gone very still. Then he'd said, "You can't. Not, I don't feel it. Not this isn't the right time." Just those 2 words, flat and final, the most devastating kindness she'd ever been shown. Because the kindness was in the honesty, and the honesty was that a woman who loved Rome Lazaro was a woman with a target on her back. She'd walked away, She'd built her life around the walking away. She'd chosen Damon, which was not a choice she'd made consciously, but a slow gravitational pull toward the familiar architecture of a man who needed to control her, because that architecture had been the landscape of her childhood, and sometimes you mistake familiarity for safety. She knew all of this. She'd worked it out with a therapist she'd seen for 11 months until Damon found the billing statements and broke her laptop. Knowing it didn't make sitting in Rome's kitchen at dawn any less complicated. "I want to help," she said. "With whatever you're planning. I want to be part of it." "No." "Rome, no. You're a civilian. You stay here. You stay out of it. And I have access to this hospital server." She watched his jaw tighten. "My fingerprint unlocks $37 million that Volkov's people are currently trying to crack using tools that will fail because Damon built that lock around my specific biometric. I'm not a civilian in this situation. I'm the key." She leaned forward despite her ribs. "Use me or Volkov will." The silence that followed was different from the comfortable ones. This one had edges. Rome stared at her with the look of a man who was working through a calculation he didn't like the variables of, running scenarios in his head the way she imagined he ran all of them. Fast, unsentimental, outcome-focused. "I need to think," he said. "Think fast." He stood abruptly. "Get some rest. Actual rest." The doctor said, "If you say doctor's orders, I will throw this mug at your head." He almost smiled. The corner of his mouth moved approximately 3 millimeters, which on Rome's face was equivalent to a full grin from anyone else. "Get some rest," he repeated, and left the kitchen. She sat alone until the coffee went cold, watching the sun climb over the Blackwater skyline and trying not to think about the women she'd left behind at Greystone Memorial, who were waking up this morning to the same cycle she'd barely escaped. She thought about them anyway. The problem arrived at 11:15 in the form of a man named Cassian Reyes. Selene was awake, showered, wearing clothes that had appeared on the dresser while she slept. Jeans, a long-sleeved shirt, boots in her exact size that she was choosing not to think too hard about. When the elevator opened and a man walked in who was not one of Rome's regular soldiers. He was about Rome's age, maybe a year older. Mixed, olive-complexioned, with close-cropped dark hair going gray at the temples and the kind of lean, compact physicality that came from being good at violence in enclosed spaces. He wore a charcoal jacket and jeans and moved with the casual confidence of a man who knew exactly what room he was walking into because he'd designed it. He stopped when he saw Selene, looked at her, looked at Rome, who was standing at the living room windows with a phone pressed to his ear. Rome ended the call. "You brought her here," Cassian said. Not a question. Not quite an accusation. Something poised between them. "She called. She called." Cassian repeated it the way you repeat something that you're breaking down for structural failures. "She called, and you drove 4 vehicles into Greystone Heights and shot a Volkov asset in his own apartment, and now she's standing in your living room, in your building, and you think this is, what? Contained. Damon Crow is not a significant Volkov asset. He was until you kneecapped him, at which point he became a very motivated information source." Cassian's voice stayed level, but the edges of it sharpened. He was not afraid of Rome. That was the first thing Selene noticed, the complete practiced absence of fear in how he occupied the same physical space. Victor's people picked him up from Greystone Memorial 3 hours ago. He was checked in under a John Doe, but their hospital contact flagged it. They have him. The temperature in the room dropped. Rome set down his phone very carefully on the window ledge. "What's his condition?" Rome asked. "Stable enough to talk," which he will. People always do. Cassian looked at Selene again, and the look was not cruel, but it was not warm either. Clinical, assessing, the look of a man factoring a complication into an equation. He knows about her fingerprint. He built the whole system, and the first thing Volkov's interrogators will do is break him down until he hands them every detail. He turned back to Rome, which means they'll have a name and a biometric requirement within, he checked his watch. Let's say 12 hours if Damon is brave, 6 if he isn't. "He isn't," Selene said quietly. Both men looked at her. "He isn't brave," she said. "He's never been brave. He's cornered, and he's terrified, and he will tell them everything inside the first hour if they put any kind of pressure on him." She paused. "They'll have my name before dinner." A beat of silence. "Who are you?" Cassian asked. "Selene Vale." "I'm the fingerprint." Something moved in his eyes. Not surprise. Adjustment. The micro-recalibration of a strategic mind encountering a variable it had underestimated. "She's not wrong," Rome said. He crossed the room and stood near Cassian, speaking quietly and fast in the way she recognized. The tactical cadence, information compressing into actionable units. "We move the timeline. The access protocol has to happen before Victor's team gets the biometric data. Otherwise, they start hunting her actively, and we lose the controlled approach. The timeline moves if you're willing to use her." "I'm not." "You just said we move it. That means you're using her." Cassian looked at him flatly. "Which you told her you wouldn't do." 2 hours ago, I'm guessing, based on that conversation you had, that I can reconstruct from her body language and the coffee cups on the counter. Rome's jaw tightened. "Cassian." "I'm just doing the math that you're doing more slowly because it involves her specifically." He looked at Selene without apology. "No offense." "Some taken," she said, "but keep going." He almost showed something that might have been amusement. "The window is approximately 18 to 20 hours. After that, Volkov has her name, her biometric profile, and enough motivation to put a team in the field. Once that team is active, the hospital becomes a combat zone, and the server access becomes a hostage negotiation instead of a tactical advantage." "So what's the play?" Selene asked. "We go to the hospital tonight," Rome said, and the words sounded like they cost him something. "You access the servers, we drain the wallet files and redirect the funds somewhere Volkov can't trace. He loses the money, he loses the leverage, and he has no further reason to come after you." "He'll have a reason," Cassian said. "It just won't be financial. Men like Victor don't let embarrassments walk away clean." "One problem at a time," Rome said. "One problem at a time," Cassian agreed, in the tone of a man who had heard that particular phrase too many times to find it reassuring. A phone buzzed on the table. Rome glanced at the screen, and his expression shifted. Barely, but Selene had been reading his micro-expressions since they were children, and she saw the thing that passed through his eyes like a shadow over water. Something between dread and a very particular kind of anger. He picked up the phone and walked to the far end of the room, spoke in low tones for less than a minute, then returned with the phone at his side and his hands very still, and his eyes focused on a point approximately 6 inches past reality. "What happened?" Cassian asked. Rome looked at Selene first. She didn't know why. Maybe because whatever he was about to say was aimed at her more than anyone. "Volkov's people hit one of my warehouses on the Meridian docks 40 minutes ago," he said. "They killed 2 of my men." The air went out of the room. Cassian said something sharp and low in Spanish. Rome didn't react to it. "This isn't about the money anymore," Rome continued, his voice carrying the flat, cold precision of someone who has made a decision and is now simply informing the world of its existence. "Victor is sending a message. He knows I have her. He knows I went into Greystone last night." "How?" Selene asked. "Because Damon told them before they even moved him. He had a dead man switch, some automated message that fired when his phone went inactive for more than 2 hours. Rome looked at her directly, and in his eyes she saw the thing she'd been afraid of seeing, the thing that transformed situations from dangerous to irreversible. "He told them I took you. He told them about the fingerprint. He told them everything." "How long ago did this message fire?" Cassian asked. "Best estimate? Midnight. 12 hours then. They'd already lost 12 hours of the window they thought they had." Cassian walked to the window and stood with his back to the room, staring at the city below with the quality of stillness that precedes significant movement. "They're already looking," he said. "They're already close," Rome corrected. Selene stood up. Her ribs ached. Her hands were steady, which surprised her. She thought about the ER at 2 in the morning when a trauma came in and there was no time for fear, only function. The way her body sorted itself into operational mode because there was no other available mode when someone needed her to be competent. "Then we go tonight," she said. "Not because it's the best plan, because it's the only one." Rome looked at her for a long moment. In the years between knowing him and now, she had tried hard not to think about the specific quality of his attention. The way he listened with his entire body, The way he made you feel like the most important fixed point in a shifting world, even when you knew, logically, that feeling was a side effect of his need to control every variable in his environment. She tried hard not to think about it. Standing in his penthouse with 12 hours until a criminal syndicate found her, she stopped trying. "There's something else," Cassian said, turning back from the window. He was looking at Rome, not at her, and his tone had dropped into a register she hadn't heard from him yet. The register of something not tactical but personal. "I got a call this morning from Marcus." Rome went very still. "Marcus Hale," Cassian said, and looked briefly at Selene to explain. "He runs Volkov's security operations. Former military. Good at his job in ways that are not good for us." Back to Rome. "He told me Victor wants a meeting, not an ambush, a meeting. Victor's words. He wants to negotiate the return of the funds without further escalation." "Viktor Volkov doesn't negotiate." "No, he doesn't." Cassian held his gaze. "Marcus also said, and this is the part I didn't want to say in front of her, that Victor has a name. Someone inside your operation. Someone who's been feeding him information about your movements for the past month." The words sat in the room like something radioactive. "He's bluffing," Rome said. "Maybe." Cassian didn't look convinced. Or maybe that's how he knew about last night in Greystone before Damon's dead man's switch fired. Maybe that's how he knew you'd go in personally. Maybe that's how he knew exactly which warehouse to hit this morning. Selene looked at Rome. She watched the information move through him the way she'd watched patients absorb bad diagnoses. The initial flatness of shock, the rapid-fire internal assessment, the restabilization into something functional. But underneath the restabilization, something else. Something she'd only seen on his face twice in the 20 years she'd known him. The recognition of a wound he hadn't expected. He trusted these men. Every person in this operation, in this building, in the network that kept him alive in a city that had been trying to kill him for 15 years. He had chosen each of them, tested each of them, believed in each of them with the specific, hard-won faith of a man who had learned that most trust was earned in blood, and one of them had sold him. "Find out who it is," Rome said quietly enough that Selene almost didn't hear it. "I'm already—" "Find out who it is today," Rome said, "before tonight. Because if we walk into that hospital with a leak in this team, we walk in with a bullet already loaded." Cassian nodded once, the nod of a man who understood exactly what Rome was asking and what it would cost to deliver it. He left without another word, the elevator doors closing behind him with a soft, pressurized click. Selene and Rome stood in the empty living room. "How many people know you have me here?" she asked. "6, and one of them is Victor's." "Apparently." She walked to the window and stood where Cassian had stood, looking down at the city. 62 floors below, the noon traffic moved through the canyons of glass and concrete like blood through veins, indifferent and necessary. Somewhere down there, in a warehouse, or a black-windowed office, or a restaurant with a back room nobody rented for dinner, Viktor Volkov was planning the next move in a game that had just expanded its board. And somewhere in this penthouse, behind the face of a man Rome had trusted with his life, was a door standing open to everything they were trying to protect. She pressed her palm flat against the cold glass and felt the city's vibration through it. Traffic and wind and the deep structural hum of a place that had been built on too much speed and too little mercy. "Rome," she said. He was behind her. She could feel him without turning around, the specific gravity of his presence, the way a room changed dimensionally when he occupied it. "I know," he said. "We might not make it out of tonight clean." A long pause. "We might not," he agreed. She turned. He was closer than she expected, close enough that she could see the exhaustion he'd been hiding since she arrived. The small lines around his eyes, the tension in his throat, the way he was holding himself together with the same rigidity that kept a bridge standing even after the structural engineers had started to worry. "If something happens tonight," she said, "if it goes wrong, it won't. But if it does," he looked at her. Something in his face cracked open, barely, a hairline fracture in the fortress wall. "Don't. Rome, don't say it like you're already saying goodbye." His voice was rough at the edges, in a way she'd never heard from him. "I've had enough goodbyes from you to last a lifetime." The weight of that landed exactly where he'd aimed it. She didn't say what she'd been going to say. Instead, she stood in the noon light of his window and memorized the specific way he looked when he was trying not to show her something she already knew. Outside the window, 3 floors below the rooftop across the street, a man with a telephoto lens tracked their silhouettes against the glass. He made a call. "I have eyes on the target," he said, "and the woman." The answer came back in 2 words. "Send it." The photographer across the street had 40 seconds before Rome's people found him. He didn't know that. He was still crouched behind the rooftop ventilation unit, eye pressed to the viewfinder, cycling through the burst shots he'd taken of the 2 silhouettes against the penthouse glass. The telephoto lens was good, expensive, military adjacent, the kind of equipment that didn't come from a camera shop. He'd captured enough: a woman's profile, a man's posture, the specific geometry of how they stood together in a way that told a story even through 62 floors of city air. He was uploading the images to a secure transfer when the door to the rooftop stairwell opened behind him. He heard it, turned, started to stand. The man who came through the door was one of Rome's, a broad-shouldered Haitian named Dre, who had been stationed in the building across the street since 6 that morning, watching for exactly this. He didn't speak. He crossed the rooftop in 8 steps, and the photographer made one sound, brief and involuntary, before Dre's forearm came across his throat and the camera clattered to the gravel and the upload stalled at 63%. 63% was enough. Downstairs, in a room Selene would never see, a server received a partial image file. Enough pixels to confirm a face, enough data to run through a recognition algorithm that Viktor Volkov's technology people had been running since 3 in the morning against every female face associated with Greystone Memorial Hospital's employee database. The match came back in 4 minutes. Selene Vale, registered nurse, trauma unit, the Meridian Tower, Ironcliff District, 62nd floor. Viktor Volkov read the notification on his phone, set it face down on his desk, and looked at the man sitting across from him. "Tonight," he said, "before they move her." Selene didn't know any of this yet. At 1 in the afternoon, she was sitting on the floor of Rome's study. Not in a chair, on the floor, because the floor felt more honest than the furniture, with a laptop that belonged to nobody she'd been introduced to, working her way through the hospital's server architecture documentation that Cassian had pulled from somewhere and delivered in a sealed folder without explanation. The study was the most human room in the penthouse. Stacks of papers on the desk, not filed but sorted in some system she didn't understand. A topographic map of Blackwater City's port district pinned to one wall with colored markers that formed a pattern she could half read. Shelves with books that had been actually opened. She could tell by the broken spines, the folded corners, the occasional pen mark in a margin she squinted at without being able to make out. She was building a route through the hospital's server system. Badge access to the radiology wing. Biometric scanner on server room B7. A 40-second window between the automated security sweeps. She'd found this in the system maintenance logs, a gap left by an IT contractor who'd set up the sweep schedule and apparently never closed the overlap. She was good at this, not at criminal operations, at systems. Hospitals were systems, and she'd spent 8 years learning to navigate them, understand them, find their pressure points, and their inefficiencies, and the quiet back channels where things moved faster if you knew they existed. Her hands had stopped shaking sometime around noon. She wasn't sure when. She noticed their steadiness the way you notice the absence of a sound you've been hearing so long it became background. Rome appeared in the study doorway at 1:47. He looked at her on the floor with the laptop, and something crossed his face that wasn't quite amusement and wasn't quite pain, some specific compound of the two. "I found the maintenance window," she said, not looking up. 40 seconds between security sweeps in the radiology server corridor. If we enter the wing at the right moment, we have a clean path to B7 without triggering the motion sensors. He came in and crouched down beside her. Not across from her, beside, looking at the same screen. Close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his arm. "That gap is supposed to be patched," he said. "The patch request was filed 8 months ago. The contractor hasn't been back." She glanced at him. "Your people have eyes on the hospital's IT system?" "My people have eyes on most things." That's a profoundly unsettling sentence. You're breaking into a server room tonight. This is not the moment to develop concerns about surveillance. She almost smiled. Almost. What time do we go in? 2 in the morning, minimum staff. The trauma team will be occupied. There's a pileup on Route 9 that comes in every Friday night. Drunk drivers. The hospital will be focused on that. He studied the screen. We go in through the service entrance. 3 people maximum. You, me, and 1 technical specialist who can execute the wallet transfer once you unlock the server. Not Cassian? A pause. Brief but there. Not Cassian. She understood. Cassian was finding the leak. Cassian was the one person in Rome's operation who had enough access and enough trust to track which of the 6 people who knew Selene's location had passed it to Victor's photographer, which meant Cassian couldn't go near the hospital tonight, couldn't be read into the operational specifics, because until they knew who the leak was, proximity to the operation was proximity to the enemy. The 3 of us, she said. A small target. A smaller target. Who's the technical specialist? A woman named Yara. She's not a soldier. She's a financial systems analyst, good at what she does. She'll be in and out in under 3 minutes once you open the server. Selene nodded, filed it. And after? After the files are transferred and the wallets are drained, what happens to Victor? Rome stood, moved to the window. His hands found each other behind his back, the fingers interlaced, the knuckles white. Victor becomes a man with no leverage and no money who has also declared war on my organization by killing 2 of my people this morning, he said. That situation resolves itself in a predictable direction. You're going to kill him. I'm going to let the situation resolve itself. Rome. Selene. She got up from the floor, carefully, ribs complaining, and faced him across the room. I'm not asking for a confession. I'm asking so I understand what we're actually doing tonight. Are we robbing a criminal syndicate as a defensive measure, or are we triggering a war? He turned, looked at her with those dark, exhausted, careful eyes. Both, he said. In that order. She held his gaze. Okay. I want a weapon. His expression shifted. No. If something goes wrong in that building, you're not trained, so I am, actually. She watched his surprise register and felt a grim satisfaction at it. After the second time Damon put me in the ER, I took a course. 18 months. I have a concealed carry permit that Damon didn't know about because I kept it in my locker at work. She paused. I'm not asking you to hand me a rifle. I'm asking for a handgun and the acknowledgement that I'm not a passenger tonight. Rome stared at her for a long time. After tonight, he said finally, you're going to tell me about the 18 months. After tonight, she agreed. Cassian called at 3:45 in the afternoon and asked Rome to come downstairs. The way he asked, the particular flatness of it, the absence of any contextual information in a man who normally front-loaded his communication with tactical data, told Rome before he reached the elevator that whatever waited downstairs was not a small problem. He went alone. Selene heard the elevator close and sat with the silence for a moment, then went back to the laptop because the alternative was thinking about the look on Rome's face when Cassian's name appeared on his phone, and she wasn't ready for the implications of that look yet. 40 minutes passed. She memorized the server room layout. She ran the access sequence in her mind 3 times, 4 times, building muscle memory for a physical process she'd never actually performed. Badge swipe, biometric panel, 6-digit override she'd found embedded in the maintenance documentation, server terminal, thumbprint. 48 minutes. She heard the elevator. Rome came back into the study and closed the door behind him. She knew immediately. She knew from the way he moved, not differently, not faster or slower, but with a quality of deliberateness that he only deployed when he was containing something large and volatile inside the container of his composure. Who is it? She asked. He sat down in the desk chair, put his elbows on his knees, looked at the floor for a moment in the way of someone recalibrating the weight distribution of a world that had just shifted under them. Tell me, she said. Yara, he said. The name hit her like stepping off a curb you didn't see. The financial analyst. The woman she'd never met who was supposed to go into the hospital tonight and execute the transfer that ended this. Yara has been feeding information to Volkov's network for 11 months, Rome said. His voice was controlled in the way of controlled demolition, precise devastation, contained within designated lines. Not directly. through a middleman. Small things at first, shipping schedules, port authority contacts, things that could have been coincidental. He pressed his lips together. Then last month, she started passing operational details, personnel, locations. A pause. She was the one who told them about the Greystone operation before Damon's dead man switch. She sent them the location here this morning before the photographer was ever deployed. Selene stared at him. She told them where I was. She told them where you were while she was sitting in the next room of this building. He looked up. His eyes were flat and cold, and somewhere behind the flatness was something cracked and raw that she understood was the specific pain of betrayal by someone chosen. She's been here since 8 this morning. She was going to walk into that hospital with us tonight. And Volkov's team would have been waiting. They would have taken you in the server corridor, the biometric data, the wallet access, and you. And everything we built against Victor's operation would have been used against us instead. He leaned back, ran one hand over his face in a gesture so human, so unguarded, that she felt the ache of it in her sternum. She played it perfectly. 11 months of perfect. Where is she now? Cassian has her downstairs. Does she know you know? She knows. Selene processed this. The system she'd spent 4 hours building in her head, the tight 3-person team, the clean entry, the 40-second window, the post-transfer escape, had just lost its technical architect. They had no one who could execute the wallet transfer. Without Yara, or someone who could do what Yara did, opening the server was meaningless. The money stayed locked. Victor kept his leverage. The war continued. How long would it take to find someone else? She asked. Someone I can trust completely? Someone with Yara's technical skills? He shook his head. Days. Maybe more. We don't have days. Then we have a problem. We have several. She got up and paced. The ribs protested and she breathed through it, let the pain sharpen her thinking the way it sometimes did in the ER, when exhaustion and physical stress narrowed everything down to the essential. What do you have? What do you need? What's the distance between them, and can you close it in the time available? The transfer process, she said. How technically complex is it? Rome looked at her. Complex? Explain it to me like I'm someone who can learn things. Selene, I've been reading system documentation for 4 hours. I understand the server architecture. I understand the access protocol. Talk me through the transfer process and let me tell you whether I can execute it. It's not like learning a new intake form. Cryptocurrency wallet transfers require... I know what they require. I looked it up. She turned to face him. Yara was going to use a hardware key and a transfer script she'd pre-written. The script does the complex work. She just had to initiate it correctly, verify the destination addresses, and execute in sequence. Is that right? He studied her. Broadly. Where's her script? On a drive that Cassian pulled from her kit. But even with the script, you'd need to understand. Teach me. She met his eyes. We have until 2 in the morning. That's 10 hours. Teach me what I need to know and let me spend those 10 hours learning it, and then tell me honestly whether you think I can do it. A long silence. If you make a mistake in the execution sequence, Rome said carefully, the funds don't transfer. They get flagged and locked by Volkov's own security protocol. We lose the access window permanently, and we've given Victor's network a location ping that tells them exactly which server we attempted to access. I understand. If you make a mistake and Victor's people are already inside the hospital, which, given Yara's communications with them, is a real possibility, I understand that too. She stepped closer. I'm the only option you have, Rome. Not because you want me to be, because Yara made sure I am. He looked at her for what felt like a full minute. The study was quiet around them, the city muffled 62 floors down, the air between them carrying the weight of everything they hadn't resolved and weren't going to resolve tonight. Sit down, he said finally. She sat. He pulled the drive from his jacket pocket and plugged it into the laptop. The next 6 hours were the most concentrated of Selene's life. Rome taught. She learned, not passively. She interrogated every step, pushed back on every assumption, made him repeat the sequences until she could recite them, and then made him test her while she recited them with her eyes closed to make sure they lived in her hands and not just her memory. He was a precise teacher. She hadn't expected that. He stripped each concept down to its functional core and presented it without decoration, without the condescension that came from assuming she wouldn't understand. When she didn't understand something, she said so, and he came at it from a different angle without any indication that the question was inconvenient. Around 6 in the evening, Cassian appeared with food, containers of something warm from a restaurant she didn't recognize, and set them on the desk without commentary. He glanced at the laptop screen and then at Rome, and something passed between them in that glance that Selene filed away to examine later. She ate without tasting it. Her mind was entirely occupied by sequencing. At 8:30, she ran the full procedure from memory, narrating each step aloud while Rome watched the screen to verify against Yara's script. She made 2 errors, one minor, one that would have triggered the lockout. She ran it again. 1 error, not the lockout one. Again. Clean. Again. Clean. Once more, Rome said. She ran it again. Clean. He closed the laptop, looked at her across the desk with an expression she couldn't fully read, something in the region of reluctant respect and the specific anxiety of a man who had run out of reasons to say no and didn't like the absence. "You'll do," he said. "You sound thrilled." "I sound like a man who would rather have a trained professional walking into a situation that has already been compromised by an internal betrayal." He stood. "But you'll do." Cassian appeared again at 9. He closed the study door behind him, and his face carried news before he opened his mouth. "Victor made contact," he said. "Formal communication this time. Went through Marcus Hale." "The meeting request," Rome said. "Different ask. He doesn't want a meeting anymore." Cassian placed a phone on the desk. On the screen was a text, brief and without formatting. Selene leaned forward and read it. "Return the woman to neutral ground by midnight. I take her to the server. She opens it. She walks away. You walk away. The dead stay dead, and we don't add to the count. This offer expires with tonight." She read it twice. "He wants to use me himself," she said. Her voice came out steady, which was either composure or dissociation, and she couldn't tell which. "He wants the money," Cassian said. "The woman is the method." "What's the catch?" Rome asked. He was looking at Cassian, not at the screen because he already knew what the screen said. "She walks away," Cassian said. "That's the offer. That's the phrasing of the offer." "Yes." "What's the interpretation?" Cassian looked at Selene, not unkindly, the look of a man who doesn't believe in softening information but acknowledges the weight of it. Viktor Volkov has never in his career allowed a civilian with direct knowledge of his financial architecture to walk away from an operation. The offer is real in the sense that he will honor it long enough to get what he needs from her. After that, he paused. She's a liability with a face and a name and enough information to testify in ways that would matter. Selene held very still. "He'll take me to the server," she said. "I'll open it. He'll transfer the funds. And then?" "And then," Cassian confirmed. Rome's phone was already in his hand. She hadn't seen him pick it up. He was looking at it with the flat, cold expression of a man calculating the distance between where he stood and where he needed to be. "Rome," she said. He didn't answer. "Rome!" She reached across the desk and touched his arm, which stopped him more completely than a shout would have. He looked at her. She held his gaze. "Don't respond to Victor yet. I need to tell you something." Something in his eyes shifted. He put the phone down. She took a breath. The ribs pulled. She breathed through it. "I think I know another way in," she said, "but it changes the shape of tonight completely, and it requires you to trust me in a way I don't think you're going to be comfortable with." The study was very quiet. "Tell me," he said. She told him. Took it. At 11:15, Cassian pulled Rome into the hallway. Selene heard them through the study door. Not the words, just the cadence. Cassian's voice, sharp and clipped. Rome's, lower, slower, the measured rhythm of someone holding a position. Then silence. Then Cassian again, shorter this time. Then Rome. A single sentence, and whatever that sentence was, it ended the argument. The door opened. Cassian came in and looked at her with the specific expression of a man who has lost an argument on the grounds of emotion rather than strategy, and knows it, and is choosing to be professional about it. "Rome explained your plan," he said. "It's not really a plan yet. That's what concerns me." He sat on the edge of the desk. The secondary access point you found in the maintenance documentation, the service tunnel that connects the hospital's east utility corridor to the B-Wing server room. That route bypasses every scanner we've been planning around. That's good. But it also bypasses every checkpoint that would tell us if Volkov's people are already inside. I know. Which means we walk into a building we already know has been surveilled, using a route that nobody has checked for hostile presence, with a team of 3 that has already been reduced to 2 because your technical specialist was Victor's inside agent, with a transfer procedure that you have been learning for 6 hours. He looked at her flatly. Tell me the part where this is better than the original plan. The original plan is what Yara told Victor we were doing, Selene said. She told him the entry point, the timing, the team composition, everything, which means anything we do that matches the original plan, we walk into his setup. The service tunnel changes every variable she gave him. Cassian was quiet. She couldn't have told him about the tunnel, Selene continued, because I found it in maintenance documentation that Cassian pulled after she'd already been isolated. She never had access to it. He stared at her. She's right, Rome said from the doorway. Cassian rubbed the back of his neck, the gesture of a man who has been outmaneuvered by logic he doesn't like. The tunnel is unguarded because nobody uses it, which also means we won't have backup positions or escape vectors if something goes wrong inside. Then nothing goes wrong inside, Rome said. That sentence has never once made anything go right. Cassian, I know. He stood. 2 a.m, service entrance on Caldwell Street. I'll have vehicles staged 4 blocks out. He looked at Selene one more time, the full assessing look of a man revising a calculation. You understand that if this works, you walk out of that hospital with knowledge of a financial operation that 6 federal agencies would love to hear about. I'm a nurse, she said. I have cracked ribs and a concussion risk, and I haven't slept in 36 hours. I'm not thinking about federal agencies. What are you thinking about? She held his gaze. I'm thinking about getting through tonight. He nodded once. Left. The study was quiet again. Rome remained in the doorway, arms crossed, watching her with an unreadable expression that she had given up trying to decode and had decided to simply receive. You should sleep for a few hours, he said. So should you. I don't sleep before operations. That explains so much about your face. He almost did the 3mm thing again. Almost. Rome. She gathered the laptop and the drive and stacked them neatly on the desk. A reflexive gesture, the ER nurse in her unable to leave a work surface disordered. If Yara had time to communicate with Volkov after Cassian isolated her, if she found a way to get a message out, Victor might already know the timeline has changed. I know. He might not wait for midnight. He might move on the hospital early to cut off our access window. I know. Then we might be going into a building that's already... Selene. His voice was quiet, final. I know. She looked at him. All of it settled on her at once. The weight of the past 36 hours, the cracked ribs, the 4 hours of sleep, the 6 hours of learning something she'd never done and would need to execute perfectly in the dark while people who wanted her dead moved through the same building. The convergence of every bad decision, every stayed too long, every didn't see it coming that had assembled itself into this specific moment in this specific room. She could feel the fear. She'd been feeling it all day, managed and functional and sitting in the back of her chest like a pilot light. It was still there. It hadn't grown. She found to her own mild surprise that she wasn't afraid of dying. She was afraid of failing, of being the variable that broke the sequence, of being the person who opened the door and let the wrong thing through. I won't make a mistake, she said. Not to reassure him, to hear herself say it. Rome crossed the room, stood in front of her, reached out, and very carefully, with the deliberateness of a man who had calculated the distance between intention and consequence and chosen to cross it anyway, put his hand against the side of her face. His thumb rested at her temple. His palm was warm against her jaw. She went very still. I know you won't, he said. He held her face for one moment, one careful, deliberate moment, and then let go. Stepped back, reassembled the fortress with the efficiency of long practice. 2 hours, he said. Sleep. He left the study. Selene sat down on the floor again, back against the desk, knees pulled up. The city glowed through the windows, indifferent and enormous. She pressed her palm against the carpet and felt the building's structural hum vibrating up through her hand and into her bones. Somewhere in that city, Viktor Volkov was moving his pieces. Somewhere in the building below her, a woman who had betrayed Rome for 11 months was in a room with Cassian Reyes, and Selene did not spend time thinking about what that room sounded like. Somewhere between now and 2 in the morning, the plan she had proposed to Rome would either work or it would not, and the variable that determined the outcome was a procedure she'd learned in 6 hours and had practiced clean exactly twice. She was going to sleep for 2 hours. She was going to wake up. She was going to walk into Greystone Memorial Hospital through a tunnel nobody was supposed to use. And if Victor's people were already inside, if the building she'd worked in for 3 years had been transformed in the dark into the kind of place it had never been supposed to be, she was going to find out something about herself that 30 years of surviving hadn't yet required her to know. She closed her eyes. In a parking structure 4 blocks from Greystone Memorial, a black van had been sitting with its engine off since 9 in the evening. Inside it, 6 men waited with the particular patience of people paid to be patient. Their weapons were field-checked and ready. Their earpieces were active. Their orders were specific and had been repeated twice to ensure no ambiguity. At 11:47, the van's radio crackled. "Change of plan," said the voice on the other end. "She's not coming through the main entry. Find the service tunnel." The man in the front passenger seat pulled up a blueprint on a tablet, found it in under a minute. "Copy," he said. "We'll be in position by midnight." He looked at the driver. "She's walking into us," he said. The driver started the engine. The tunnel smelled like rust and standing water, and the particular chemical sourness of a building that processed human suffering for a living. Selene had walked Greystone Memorial's public corridors for 3 years and never once thought about what lay underneath them. The utility veins, the mechanical intestines, the infrastructure that kept the lights on and the oxygen flowing, and the imaging servers running at constant temperature regardless of what happened in the wards above. She thought about it now, moving through a 4-foot-wide concrete passage with a flashlight in one hand, and Rome 2 steps behind her and the weight of a compact 9mm pressing against her hip with every step. She'd slept 90 minutes, which wasn't 2 hours, but was something. She'd woken with her heart already at operational tempo, the way it did before difficult shifts, and dressed in the dark clothes Rome had left outside the study door without waking her. Drank half a cup of coffee standing over the sink. Checked the drive in her jacket pocket 3 times. They'd left the penthouse at 1:15 through a basement exit that emptied into a service alley, moving to a vehicle Cassian had staged the previous day. Not one of the armored SUVs, a nondescript gray sedan registered to a shell company that had existed since Tuesday for exactly this purpose. Cassian drove. Rome sat in the passenger seat. Selene sat in the back and watched the city slide past the windows and thought about the sequence. Badge. Scanner. 6 digits. Terminal. Thumb. Badge. Scanner. 6 digits. Terminal. Thumb. They'd left the car on Caldwell Street at 1:40 and covered the remaining 4 blocks on foot, moving through the alley network that Cassian had mapped the previous afternoon. The service entrance to Greystone Memorial's East Utility Wing was a steel door with an electronic lock that Cassian bypassed in 40 seconds, using a device she didn't ask about. Then the tunnel. She moved fast despite the ribs, keeping her breathing controlled and shallow. Deep breaths were a luxury her body wasn't offering tonight. The flashlight beam cut ahead of her through the dark, catching the low ceiling, the exposed pipe runs, the condensation beating on the concrete walls. Behind her, Rome moved without sound. That was the thing about him in operational mode. He shed all unnecessary physical output, became something compressed and precise. A reduction of a person down to pure function. Cassian had stayed at the entrance. His job was the outside perimeter and the exit vehicles. He'd looked at Selene before she went in with the expression of a man performing final calculations and not entirely satisfied with the answer. "Clean and fast," he'd said. "Clean and fast," she'd agreed. He'd looked at Rome. Rome had nodded once. Cassian had let them go. The tunnel ran for approximately 200 feet before it intersected with the B-Wing utility corridor. She knew this from the maintenance documentation she'd spent 4 hours memorizing. 70 steps, give or take. She counted them now as she walked. 31, 32. At 47, she stopped. Rome was behind her immediately, close, one hand at her shoulder. She turned her flashlight off. In the darkness ahead, something breathed. Not the building, not the pipes. Something with a chest and lungs. Something that shifted its weight with the small, involuntary creak of a person trying to hold still and not quite succeeding. She reached back without turning around and found Rome's forearm, pressed 3 fingers against it once. He understood. His hand moved from her shoulder, and she felt, rather than heard him adjust his position behind her, felt the air change with the specific displacement of someone who has drawn a weapon. She stood completely still and listened. 1 person. Maybe 2. 10, 12 feet ahead, around the bend where the tunnel jogged left before opening into the B-wing corridor. Waiting. Yara had told them. Not the service tunnel. Cassian was right that Yara couldn't have known about it. But she knew Selene's badge access. She knew the only server room Selene could unlock was B7. And anyone who knew B7 and had access to building schematics could trace the utility corridor back to its access points, could map every possible approach vector, could position people at every one. They hadn't changed the variable. They'd just moved the ambush point. She thought about turning back, ran it through in 3 seconds. Back to Cassian, regroup, new plan. But new plan meant more time, and more time meant Victor's financial team getting closer to cracking the biometric lock through brute force. And a Victor with access to $37 million was a Victor who could afford to be patient about everything else. She didn't turn back. She reached into her jacket pocket and found the flashlight, turned it back on, and aimed it directly at the tunnel bend. "I can hear you," she said. Her voice came out even. She was mildly surprised. "I'm going to keep walking. I'm coming through." A beat of silence. Then a voice from around the bend, male, speaking English with a flat inflection that placed him somewhere in Eastern Europe. "Put down the light, hands visible." "No." Another beat. She heard movement. 2 people. She was right. 2 people redistributing around the corner. She started walking again. Slow and deliberate, flashlight forward, hands visible but not raised. Behind her, Rome moved in her wake like a second shadow. She came around the bend. 2 men, both in dark clothing, both armed, positioned on either side of the corridor, with tactical spacing that suggested training rather than improvisation. They were not expecting her to walk toward them. She could see it in the half-second recalibration in their posture, the micro-adjustment of people whose ambush geometry had just been disrupted by the target walking directly into it. The one on the left spoke. "Stop. Where is—" Rome came around the corner behind her, and the man on the left went down without finishing the sentence, Rome's forearm across his throat, a single controlled compression and release that was efficiency rather than cruelty. The man crumpled, unconscious, breathing. The one on the right had his weapon up in under a second, and Selene was already moving, not away but sideways along the wall, creating an angle problem, and Rome was already past her, reaching the second man's gun hand with both of his, redirecting the muzzle toward the ceiling as it discharged once, an enormous disorienting sound in the concrete corridor, her ears instantly ringing. And then the gun was in Rome's hand, and the second man was against the wall with Rome's forearm at his sternum. 4 seconds. Start to finish. Her ears were ringing. Her heart was at a frequency she could feel in her vision. She pressed her back against the wall and breathed. 1 breath, 2, and then looked at Rome. He looked at her. "Go," he said. She went. The B-Wing utility corridor was 40 feet of fluorescent-lit concrete that dead-ended at a steel door marked Authorized Personnel, Server Access B7. She reached it in 15 seconds. Her badge was already in her hand. She swiped it. The panel blinked, a green light, a soft mechanical click. She pushed through into server room B7. The room was cold. Hospital server rooms ran cold to protect the hardware, and B7 was no exception. The air hit her like opening a freezer, sharp and dry, and the hum of the server racks was a constant low-frequency vibration that she felt in her back teeth. The room was long and narrow, 2 rows of floor-to-ceiling rack units running parallel to each other, blue indicator lights blinking in the darkness, like the vital signs of something enormous and entirely indifferent. The biometric terminal was at the far end. A touchscreen panel mounted to the final rack unit, currently dark, waiting. She moved fast between the rack rows, counting units. Her ribs pulled with every stride. She reached the terminal and pressed her thumb to the biometric reader. The screen woke. A loading sequence. 4 seconds of progress bar. Then a prompt she hadn't seen in the documentation but had anticipated and prepared for. A secondary authentication field. A 6-digit code that she pulled from memory without hesitation. Damon's birthday. She'd guessed it based on everything she knew about how Damon's mind worked. The arrogance of a man who believed his own life was the most important reference point for everything he built. The code accepted. The system opened. She pulled the drive from her jacket and inserted it into the terminal's USB port. The transfer script loaded automatically. She stared at the screen and ran the sequence in her mind one more time. The sequence she'd practiced clean twice and now needed to execute perfectly in a cold server room while her ears rang from a gunshot and her ribs were trying to separate from her sternum. Clean, twice. "You'll do," she began. The first command executed. A directory tree unfolded on the screen, nested wallet files embedded inside medical imaging metadata exactly as Rome had described. Hundreds of files, innocuous file names, patient scan designators that meant nothing to any IT auditor who wasn't specifically looking for cryptocurrency architecture buried in the data. Second command. The script identified and isolated the wallet files automatically. A progress indicator appeared. She watched it move and felt the specific tension of a person watching something they cannot speed up and can only ruin by interference. From the corridor she heard something. Voices. More than 2. Not from the direction she'd come, from the main B-wing access point at the far end of the corridor, the standard entry point that their original plan had used, the entry point that Yara had given Volkov's team as the target approach vector. They'd covered both entry points. She looked at the progress indicator. 31%. She looked at the door she'd come through, closed. Rome was on the other side. She looked at the main corridor door at the far end of the server room. Also closed, but there was light under it. The light of a phone or a flashlight, and the sound of someone working an electronic lock from the outside. 42%. The door handle moved. She pressed herself against the rack unit beside the terminal, putting steel and hardware between herself and the main door, and pulled the 9mm. She'd never fired it outside a range. Her hands were steady, which she cataloged as information and moved past. The door opened. A man came through first. Sweeping posture, weapon up, clearing right, then a second man, then a third, then behind them, in the particular unhurried manner of someone who sends other people through doors first as a matter of professional policy, a fourth person. Not a man. A woman. Late 50s, small, compact, white-haired, dressed in a dark coat that absorbed the server room's blinking blue light. She moved into the room with a quality of stillness that Selene recognized from emergency medicine. The particular composure of someone who had seen enough catastrophic situations to have stopped having physiological responses to them. She stopped when she saw Selene. Selene kept the gun up and watched the 3 armed men clock her and recalibrate and look back at the woman in the coat for instruction. The woman raised one hand. The men held. "Miss Vale," she said. Her voice was lightly accented, the English precise and slightly formal in the way of someone who learned it as a third language and then perfected it. "I'm not here to hurt you. You're in my server room with 3 armed men. I'm here to retrieve what's mine." She looked at the terminal, at the progress indicator, at the drive Selene had inserted. Her expression didn't change, but something behind her eyes tightened. "Step away from the terminal." "No. The transfer won't complete in time. My men will—" "Your men will what?" Selene pressed back harder against the rack unit, keeping the terminal behind her body. "Shoot me? Through the terminal? Through the drive?" She held the woman's gaze. "Without my thumb on that reader, the transfer aborts and every file on that server auto-encrypts to a key that doesn't exist anymore. Damon built it that way. A dead man's switch inside a dead man's switch." She watched the woman process this. "You need me breathing and cooperative, which means right now, your 3 men are decorative." A silence. The woman studied her. The quality of that study was not that of a person reconsidering. It was the quality of a person deciding how many layers deep to look at something before acting on what they found. "You're not what I expected," the woman said. "Viktor Volkov sent a woman. Viktor Volkov sends appropriate resources for the situation." A pause. I'm not Volkov's soldier, Ms. Vale. I'm his insurance policy. My name is Petra. I've been managing the financial architecture of this operation since before your former partner knew it existed. 68% on the progress indicator. Selene could see it in her peripheral vision without looking away from Petra. Then you know what happens when that transfer completes, Selene said. I know what you think happens. You drain the wallets, Victor loses leverage, and your protector, Petra tilted her head slightly. Rome Lazaro uses the chaos to end the war on favorable terms. She clasped her hands in front of her. What you don't know is that those wallets are not the primary holding. They are one node in a distribution architecture that spans 11 accounts across 4 jurisdictions. You're not stealing Victor's money, Ms. Vale. You're stealing 12% of it, 74%. Selene kept her face still. Then why are you here? Because those 12% are flagged as clean capital, laundered completely, legally unimpeachable, the component of Victor's holdings he was prepared to use for legitimate expansion. A thin pause. Losing them is not a financial disaster. It's a personal one. And Viktor Volkov is a man who responds to personal disasters personally. Meaning he doesn't stop. Meaning he stops being rational. She took one step closer, very slow, her hands still clasped. I am here, Ms. Vale, because I believe the rational outcome of tonight is preferable to the irrational one. And the rational outcome requires you to stop that transfer. 81%. Selene's thumb was on the grip of the gun, and her finger was beside the trigger, and she was thinking about 3 things simultaneously. The progress bar, the door behind her that Rome hadn't come through, and the specific credibility of a woman who walked into a hostile situation to negotiate rather than sending men first. What's the rational outcome? Selene asked. Victor keeps the 12%. You and Rome Lazaro keep your lives cleanly, without pursuit. Victor redirects his attention to the Blackwater operation through legitimate channels. He has enough leverage with city infrastructure to do this without Rome's cooperation or conflict. She paused. The war doesn't start. The people who would die in it don't die. And Rome's men who died this morning? Something moved in Petra's expression. That was not sanctioned. Someone sanctioned it. Yes. Her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Someone made a decision above my recommendation. Victor acted on grief more than strategy. He lost his nephew in an operation 18 months ago that he believes Rome was responsible for. The warehouse action this morning was emotional, not tactical. She looked at Selene directly, and in that look was something that was not quite honesty, but was the closest thing to it that a woman in her position could produce. I'm trying to prevent the next emotional decision, which will be larger and less targeted. 89%. 9 seconds, maybe 10. The door Selene had come through, the utility door, opened. Rome came through it fast and low, already reading the room as he moved, and the 3 men spun toward him, and Selene moved without deciding to move, pushing off the rack unit toward the nearest man, driving her elbow into his weapon arm as he turned, using his own momentum and her body weight to redirect the muzzle away and up. The gun discharged into the server room ceiling, shrapnel from a tile raining down, and she felt the recoil through his arm into hers, and her ribs screamed with the impact, and she stayed on her feet through pure spite. Rome was already through the second man. The third dropped his weapon and raised his hands, a practical decision, the kind made by professionals who have correctly assessed that the current situation does not pay enough. The room went still. Petra had not moved. She stood exactly where she'd stood, hands still clasped, coat unmarked, expression carrying the particular brand of calm that comes from having been in worse rooms. Rome scanned the room, found Selene, read her face, the ribs, the elbow, the fact that she was standing. Something in him loosened a fraction, the invisible tension of a coiled thing allowed to breathe. He looked at Petra. You're not Volkov's tactical team, he said. No. Who are you? Someone who would like tonight to end without a body count. She looked at the terminal behind Selene. It's done, she said, simply, without inflection. The transfer completed. Selene turned. 100%. Transfer complete. The screen showed a destination address she didn't recognize. Rome's accounts, presumably, or Cassian's, or some shell architecture that would make the funds untraceable before Victor's people could file a freeze request. $37 million. Gone. She pulled the drive from the port. The screen went dark. The server room returned to its cold, humming indifference. She looked at Petra. Petra looked back at her with the expression of a woman updating a spreadsheet in her head. Victor will know in approximately 6 minutes, Petra said. When he knows, the rational version of him ends tonight. Everything that follows will be the other version. How much time does that give us? Rome asked. Enough to leave this building. Petra unclasped her hands. Not much more. Your men, Rome said. Looking at the three, two still functional, one gradually recovering consciousness on the floor. They'll stay here until you're clear. You have my word on that. She paused. I'm aware that means nothing to you. I'm offering it anyway because it's the only currency I have right now. Rome looked at her for a long moment, the look of a man taking a reading. What do you want in exchange? He asked. Nothing tonight. She met his gaze. But I will want something, eventually. When the irrational version of Victor has finished what he's going to start. A beat. You're burning your position, Rome said. Victor's irrational phase tends to include collateral damage among his own people. She said it without self-pity. I've survived 3 of his irrational phases over 20 years. I don't believe I'll survive a 4th. A pause. When the time comes, I'll find you. Rome held her gaze for 2 more seconds. Then he looked at Selene. She nodded. Once. Her read of Petra wasn't clean. Nothing about tonight was clean. But it was functional. Petra was a pragmatist in a burning building, and pragmatists in burning buildings made useful temporary allies because the fire didn't care about their loyalties either. Move, Rome said. They moved. Back through the utility door, into the server corridor, Selene half a step ahead and Rome behind her, moving fast through the fluorescent-lit concrete passage. The 2 men Rome had taken down in the tunnel were still down, one unconscious, one sitting against the wall holding his head with no particular urgency. Through the utility corridor, into the tunnel, running now. Not sprinting. She couldn't sprint. Her ribs were a single continuous message of objection. But moving at the hard, fast walk of people who have accepted pain as a fixed cost and are paying it without complaint. The tunnel was dark. Rome had her flashlight, keeping the beam ahead, and she followed it and didn't think about anything except the distance to the exit and the drive in her jacket pocket and the sound of both their breathing in the narrow concrete dark. 140 steps. She knew because she'd counted on the way in. She counted on the way out. At 97, Rome's phone vibrated. He checked it without slowing. Cassian, he said. She looked at him. The flashlight beam caught the edge of his face. What she saw there made her ribs hurt in a new way that had nothing to do with Damon Crowe. What happened? She asked. Volkov's people hit the vehicles, he said. Both of them, 4 blocks out. She stopped walking. Cassian, he's not in the vehicles. Rome kept moving, and she matched his pace. He saw them coming. He's repositioned. He was already dialing. But we don't have an exit. The phone rang twice. Cassian picked up on the 3rd. I'm on Brennan Street, he said, without preamble, without audible distress. East side, blue door, building 44. How far out are you? 2 minutes. Victor's people are active on 3 blocks around the hospital. 4-man teams minimum. They're not searching, they're containing. A pause. He knows you completed the transfer. He's not trying to stop it anymore. He's trying to make sure you don't leave. Selene heard that land in the tunnel between them and felt its full weight. The rational version of Victor ending, the other version starting. We'll be there in 2 minutes, Rome said. I'll be ready. Another pause. Rome. He sent 12 people that we've identified. How many unidentified? Unknown. The word that lived next to everything worst. Just move fast. The call ended. 140 steps. She reached 140 and hit the steel door at the end of the tunnel at a pace that bruised her shoulder. Rome's hand was over hers on the handle before she could push, and he went through first. 1 second of absolute exposure, weapon up, scanning, then pulled her through into the cold outside air. The alley behind Greystone Memorial's east utility entrance was dark and wet. Rain-slicked pavement reflecting the orange sodium lights of the street beyond. Quiet. One parked car, unoccupied, a dumpster, nothing moving. Rome took her hand, not tenderly, functionally, a grip on her wrist that said, "Stay close and match my pace and don't let go," and she closed her fingers around his forearm, and they moved together into the city. 2 blocks north, 1 block east. The rain had started again, fine and cold, soaking through her jacket in the first 30 seconds, plastering her hair against her face. She didn't push it away. She kept moving. Brennan Street, number 44. A blue door in a narrow building wedged between a laundry and a closed hardware store. Rome knocked. 3 times. A pause. Once. The door opened. Cassian. He had a cut along his jaw that was still bleeding, and his jacket was torn at the shoulder, and his eyes were doing the thing they did when he was operating beyond his preferred parameters. Sharp, fast, slightly overcalibrated. He looked at them, assessed them, stepped back to let them in. The space behind the door was a ground-floor storage room. Bare walls, bare bulbs, metal shelving holding nothing. It smelled like dust and cold air and the metallic undertone of a man who'd been in a physical altercation recently. "What happened to your face?" Rome asked. "One of the 4-man teams found my first position." He closed the door, bolted it. "I found them back." He looked at Selene. "You have the drive?" She patted her jacket pocket. "Good." He looked at Rome. "Victor knows. Whatever you thought the timeline was, move it to right now. He's pulled every resource he has in Blackwater tonight. I'm seeing movement on 4 different channels." He reached into his jacket and produced a phone, already displaying a map of the surrounding blocks with red markers moving in irregular patterns. He's not maintaining a perimeter. He's sweeping, which means he's willing to be visible. "He's already past calculating," Rome said. "Past it and gone." Cassian looked at the map. "We have 1 vehicle I cached that they haven't found. Parking structure on Vance Avenue, level 2, space 14. If we move in the next 8 minutes, we can reach it before the sweep pattern closes that block." 8 minutes. Selene looked at the map, looked at the red markers, looked at the space between their current position and Vance Avenue. 4 blocks, maybe 5. Through streets that were being actively swept by teams of 4 armed men working for a man who had just finished being rational and started being something else. She thought about Petra in the server room, the rational version ending. She thought about this drive in her pocket, warm from being pressed against her body, carrying $37 million of converted financial data. She thought about Rome beside her, wet from the rain, jaw set, eyes moving through the map with the fast, unsentimental focus of a man eliminating options until only one remained. She looked up and found him already looking at her. 8 minutes, she said. 8 minutes, he agreed. Cassian checked the bolt on the door, checked his weapon, looked at both of them with the expression of a man preparing to do something he has calculated and doesn't like and is going to do anyway. "The route goes through the alley behind Marchetti's," he said. "There's a team on the north end of that block. We'll cross their sweep pattern. There's a 60-second window between their rotations." He paused. "If the timing is off by more than 30 seconds, we walk into them." Rome didn't answer. He was looking at his phone. He turned the screen toward Cassian. Selene looked at it too. A text message from an unknown number. 4 words. "He knows about the roof." Cassian went very still. "The roof," Selene said. "The meridian," Rome said. His voice had dropped into a register she hadn't heard yet. Not cold. Colder than cold. The temperature of something that doesn't have a name in weather systems. "Victor knows where we're based. He's had that since Yara. But this..." He stared at the text. "This is someone telling us he's moving on it. Tonight. While we're not there." "Who's in the building?" Cassian asked. "Nobody." Rome's jaw worked. "I cleared it before we left. I didn't want..." He stopped. "I cleared it." "Then there's nothing to hit," Cassian said. "There's everything to hit." Rome pocketed the phone. "The operations archive. Every document, every contact, every financial record I've built over 15 years of..." He stopped again. The sentence had a direction he wasn't going to take it. "If Victor's people are in that building tonight, they're not there to burn it. They're there to take it." The silence in the storage room was the particular silence of a decision forming in real time. Selene looked at Cassian. Cassian looked at Rome. "We split," Cassian said. The word came out flat and weighted. "You go back for the building. I get her to Vance and out of the city." Rome's face didn't move. "Rome," Cassian said. "The building or the woman. You can't do both from here, and you know it." The rain hammered the single small window above the shelving unit. Outside, somewhere on the block to the north, a car door closed. Then another. The quiet choreography of men taking positions. Rome looked at Selene. She looked back at him. She understood, without either of them saying it, that this was the moment the evening had been building toward. Not the server room, not the tunnel, not the transfer. This. The moment where the thing he'd spent 15 years constructing stood in one hand and the person he'd spent 20 years not admitting anything about stood in the other, and the city outside was closing in on both of them with 8 minutes on the clock. "Go," she said. "Selene, the archive matters. Your operation matters. People's lives depend on what's in that building, and you know it." She held his gaze. "I go with Cassian. You go back. We meet at—" She looked at Cassian. "Northgate Safe House," he said. 40 minutes. She looked back at Rome. 40 minutes. He looked at her. For 3 full seconds, which was an eternity for a man in his position, he simply looked at her. Like he was memorizing something. Like he was doing the specific calculus of a person deciding how much weight to put on the evidence in front of him versus the weight of every other time he'd made a call like this. "If Cassian tells you to run," Rome said quietly, "you run. Whatever he says, no argument." "Okay? I'm serious." "I know you are." "Selene, Rome." She stepped close enough to make it count. 40 minutes. Go." He held her gaze for 1 more second. Then he moved. The door opened and he was gone into the rain, moving fast along the building line toward the street, and Selene watched the space where he'd been for exactly the time it took to breathe once, and let the fear arrive, and then put it somewhere functional. Cassian was already at the door. "Ready?" he said. She checked the drive, checked the gun, straightened up despite the ribs. "Move," she said. They went into the rain. 2 blocks north, in a parking structure on Vance Avenue, a gray sedan sat in space 14 with a full tank and clean plates and everything they needed to get out of the radius of Viktor Volkov's sweep. 1 block north of that, a 4-man team rounded a corner and stopped at the entrance to the alley that Cassian needed to cross. Cassian checked his watch. They were 31 seconds early. He looked at Selene. She looked at the alley entrance, at the 4 men, at the drive in her jacket. She looked at Cassian. How good are you at creating a distraction?" Cassian looked at her for exactly 1 second. The look of a man running probability calculations at a speed that most people reserved for panic. "Define distraction," he said, "something that moves 4 men 30 feet north for 45 seconds. He reached into his jacket and produced a phone. A burner, she noted, different from the one he'd used earlier. He typed something fast, sent it, pocketed the phone. 20 seconds, he said. She watched the 4 men at the alley entrance. They stood with the professional stillness of people paid to hold position, weapons not visible but present, in the way weapons were always present on men like this. Implicit, gravitational, altering the physics of the space around them. 17 seconds. 18. At the far northern end of the block, a car alarm went off. Not a polite suburban chirp. A full, shrieking, cycling alarm from a vehicle that had been specifically chosen for acoustic output, because the sound bounced off the building faces and filled the street with a disorienting, omnidirectional noise that made instinctive assessment of direction nearly impossible. All 4 men turned north. Now, Cassian said. They crossed. Selene moved low and fast along the building line. Cassian 2 steps behind her, both of them using the dumpster and the delivery truck parked at the alley's midpoint as cover. 40 feet of open exposure, the wet asphalt reflecting orange light, her boots making no sound she could hear over the car alarm still screaming to the north. The far side of the alley. A doorway. She pressed into it and Cassian came in beside her and they stood with their backs to the door and waited. The car alarm stopped. Silence. From the north end of the block, she heard the 4 men resume their positions without any indication they'd seen movement. Cassian exhaled through his nose, the controlled exhale of a man who had been holding something in and was now releasing precisely the amount he could afford to. "Vance Avenue," he said. "Half a block." They moved. The parking structure on Vance was a 5-story concrete shell that smelled like exhaust and standing water. Level 2, Space 14. The gray sedan sat exactly where Cassian had described, unremarkable among a dozen other unremarkable vehicles, the kind of car that existed specifically to not be remembered. Cassian had the keys. He unlocked it, scanned the surrounding level. Habit, thoroughness, the behavioral grammar of a man who treated exposure as a professional failing, and got in. Selene folded into the passenger seat and closed the door with the careful quiet of someone who had internalized over the past 6 hours that sound was currency and you didn't spend it carelessly. The engine started on the first turn. "Northgate," she said. "Northgate." He pulled out of the space. 40 minutes, assuming Rome is... He'll be there. Cassian glanced at her. Not with doubt, exactly. With the look of a man who had seen Rome make decisions that prioritized strategy over survival, and was performing a private actuarial calculation he didn't share aloud. "He'll be there," Selene said again, and this time it wasn't reassurance. It was information. Cassian drove. She sat with the drive in her lap and watched the city slide past the windows, and thought about Rome moving through the Ironcliff district toward the Meridian Tower with whatever he had left after tonight. 2 working hands and 15 years of knowing exactly how this city moved when it was angry. She thought about Petra in the server room, the rational version ending. She thought about Damon in a hospital somewhere, in a room under a name nobody would look for, with a shattered knee and a mouthful of information he'd already spent. She thought about her mother in the care facility upstate, asleep in a room with Rome's people outside the door, unaware that her daughter had spent the night running through tunnels with a stolen drive and a borrowed gun. She pressed the drive against her sternum with both hands and breathed. The Northgate safe house was a second-floor apartment above a closed Vietnamese restaurant in a neighborhood that had been gentrifying for 12 years without ever quite getting there. The street below smelled like old fry oil and rain. The apartment smelled like no one had lived in it recently, which was the point. Cassian got them inside in under a minute. He bolted the door, checked the 2 windows, then sat at the small table near the kitchen and set his weapon on the surface in front of him with the specific deliberateness of a man who was telling his nervous system it could stand down temporarily. Selene sat on the couch. The drive went on the coffee table. She looked at it for a moment. The small rectangle of black plastic that contained $37 million and had cost, in the past 24 hours, 2 of Rome's men, 1 of Cassian's vehicles, 1 server room confrontation, and a number of smaller casualties she was still adding up. She checked her watch. 12 minutes since they'd left the storage room on Brennan Street. 28 minutes until the 40-minute mark. She pressed 2 fingers to the inside of her wrist. Her pulse was 108, down from wherever it had been in the tunnel, going in the right direction. Her ribs had stopped communicating in individual sensations and started broadcasting as a single unified signal that occupied the entire left side of her torso. She breathed around it, the shallow, disciplined breath she'd been practicing since the previous evening, and thought about what a radiograph of her current internal state would look like, and then deliberately stopped thinking about it because there was nothing useful in that direction. 26 minutes. Cassian was on his phone, quietly, face neutral, reading something she couldn't see. After a moment, he set the phone down. "The Meridian," he said. She looked at him. "Volkov's people entered the building at 1:53. He paused. "Rome got there at 2:01. The math was not comfortable. 8 minutes ahead of him. "How many went in?" she asked. "My contact counted 6 entering. No confirmation of how many were already inside." He looked at the phone. The building went dark at 2:03. Security system, cameras, everything. Either Volkov's tech team cut it or Rome cut it himself, she said. He wouldn't want documentation of what happened inside. Cassian held her gaze for a moment. No, he wouldn't. She looked at her watch. 23 minutes. She picked the drive up from the coffee table and turned it over in her hands. The plastic was smooth and featureless. A thumbnail drive, the kind you could buy at any electronics store, storing the kind of data that rewrote power balances. "Cassian," she said. He looked up. The 11 other accounts, the ones Petra said the 37 million is connected to, the rest of Victor's distribution architecture. She met his eyes. Rome knew about them? A pause. He knew, and the plan was never just to drain one node and call it finished. Another pause. Longer. The 37 million is leverage, Cassian said carefully. It's flagged capital, clean capital. Victor was going to use it for legitimate expansion, real estate, infrastructure contracts, the kind of investment that converts criminal wealth into institutional power. He looked at his hands. Losing that capital doesn't end Victor's operation. It ends his transition, his respectability project. A beat. Without that, he stays in the margins. He stays in places where law enforcement already watches, where he can't grow, where he stays manageable, she said. Where Rome can manage him, Cassian said. The distinction was small but precise. She sat with that for a moment. She was not naive about what Rome was. She had never been naive about it, not even at 12 years old when he was just a foster kid with quick hands and no smile who showed up whenever the building got dangerous. She had not chosen to be with Damon because she was naive. She had chosen Damon because he was, at the time, the available architecture of a familiar kind of need. And she had stayed with Damon because leaving was the kind of complicated that didn't resolve in a single decision. She was not naive about tonight either, about what had happened in the server room and what it meant, about the two men in the tunnel who were unconscious but breathing because Rome had made a calculation about what was necessary, about Petra's men, left in B7 by a woman whose pragmatism was the closest thing to mercy available in that room. She was not naive. She was also alive, and the drive was in her hands, and 20 minutes remained on the clock. She put the drive back on the table. 19 minutes. At 17 minutes, Cassian's phone buzzed. He looked at it. His face did something that she had not yet seen it do. A visible release of tension, so brief it was barely there. But there. He turned the phone so she could see the screen. A single word from an unknown number. Clean. She exhaled. Not a conscious decision, just the body receiving information and responding with the autonomic relief of a system that had been running emergency protocols for 20 hours and had just received the all-clear signal it had been calibrating for. She pressed her palms flat against her thighs and breathed, and did not think about what clean had cost. Rome arrived at the North Gate safe house at 2:47 in the morning. She heard him on the stairs. His particular footfall, the weight distribution she'd cataloged without meaning to over the past day and a half of cohabiting a space with him. She was already standing when the knock came. 3 times, a pause, once. Cassian opened the door. Rome came in. He had a cut across his left hand, wrapped in a strip of fabric that had been dark red and was now darker. His coat was gone. He'd left it somewhere, or it had been ruined. His shirt was intact, but there was a bruise forming at the corner of his jaw, and his left eye was slightly swollen, not closed, but heading in a direction. He scanned the room the way he always scanned rooms. Found Selene. Stopped scanning. She didn't say anything. She crossed the room and took his cut hand in both of hers and looked at the improvised wrap, pressed her thumb gently along the edge to find the extent of the wound, and catalogued what she found. "You'll need stitches," she said. "I know. How many of Volkov's men?" 6. She looked up from the hand, looked at his face. "And?" she said. "And they made choices that left limited options." He said it flat, without drama or justification. The voice of a man who had done what the situation required and was not going to perform remorse about it, but was also not going to perform the absence of it. She nodded, put the hand down gently. "The archive?" she asked. "Intact." Something in his face settled slightly. "They'd been inside 8 minutes when I got there. They had the room open, but they hadn't started copying files. Another 10 minutes, and—" He stopped. "It's intact. Volkov will send more. Volkov will try to." He moved to the table, saw the drive, looked at it for a moment. He has no clean capital now, and no internal intelligence since Yara is no longer an asset, and no tactical advantage since his sweep pattern tonight failed. He sat down heavily. The first time she'd seen him sit with anything other than precision. The sit of a man whose body was presenting its invoice. "He'll retrench. Pull resources back. Try to recalculate. Oh, he looked at Cassian. How long does that buy us? Weeks, Cassian said. Maybe more if Petra moves when she said she would. Petra, Rome repeated. He looked at Selene. You trusted her. I trusted her assessment of her own situation. There's a difference. She paused. She was right about Victor crossing into irrational. Everything she predicted about tonight was accurate. She was also managing us. Yes, competently. Selene met his gaze. She's going to come to you eventually. When Victor's irrational phase starts costing her people, she wants to keep alive. She'll bring whatever leverage she's been holding back, and she'll expect something in return. I know. What will you give her? He looked at her for a long moment. Not evasively, considering. The way he considered everything, from the ground up. Whatever keeps her useful and doesn't cost me more than it's worth, he said. It wasn't a reassuring answer. It was an honest one, which was its own kind of value in a room where everything had been weighed and measured all night. Cassian stood. I'll get the med kit, he said, and disappeared into the apartment's back room with the practiced tact of a man who understood when his presence was a variable that was no longer needed. Selene sat down across from Rome at the small table. The drive sat between them. She looked at it. He looked at it. What happens to it now? She asked. It goes into the architecture Cassian built. The funds get distributed through clean accounts, moved in increments over the next 6 months, converted through enough layers that by the time it surfaces anywhere traceable, it looks like legitimate capital. He paused. Some of it won't surface. Some of it disappears into operational costs. Another pause. Some of it I'll give back. She looked up. To who? The hospital. He said it without meeting her eyes, which was how she knew it mattered to him. The imaging servers Damon corrupted. Greystone Memorial's systems have been compromised for 18 months. They're understaffed, the equipment's outdated, the ER you worked in has been running on contingency power because the main grid contract expired and the city hasn't renewed it. He finally looked at her. Anonymous donation, infrastructure fund, no one traces it back. She sat with that. The specific weight of it. $37 million of criminal wealth, and some fraction of it going back into the building where she'd spent 3 years trying to keep people alive. It doesn't balance, she said. No, he agreed. It doesn't. She understood that he was not offering it as balance. He was offering it as something else. The small, imperfect gesture of a man who understood that the math of what he'd built would never reconcile, but who made the gesture anyway because the alternative was not making it. Cassian returned with a metal first aid kit and set it on the table between them without comment. Selene opened it, found what she needed, and began cleaning Rome's cut hand with the careful efficiency of someone who had done this hundreds of times in conditions considerably less quiet. He let her work without pulling away. This was, she recognized, its own kind of concession. Your mother, he said while she worked. I know, I need to call her. My people will stay until you tell them to leave. I'll tell them to leave in the morning, after she knows I'm safe. She threaded a needle. She doesn't need to know the details. No. She just needs to know I'm out. You are out, he said. His situation is contained. He'll be moved to a facility upstate. He won't be in any position to cause further complications. She didn't ask what facility. She didn't ask what contained meant. She put the needle through and drew the thread and worked with the precision of someone who was choosing, consciously, what questions to carry and which ones to set down. What about me? She asked. He looked at her over the work. What do you mean? I'm a nurse who broke into a hospital server room at 2 a.m, transferred $37 million in criminal funds using biometric access that I technically provided under duress, and spent the better part of a day in the fortified penthouse of a man who runs the largest criminal operation on the East Coast. She tied off the stitch, added another. Legally, structurally, professionally. What do I look like right now? You look like a victim of domestic violence who was used without consent by an abusive partner as a component of a criminal scheme. His voice was flat and specific, the voice of someone who had prepared this answer before she asked the question. Who was subsequently extracted from a dangerous situation and kept safe during a federal-adjacent takedown of a weapons trafficking network. A pause. The biometric access was used without your knowledge. Your badge credentials were incorporated into Damon's system without your authorization. Every access tonight was performed under duress with credible threat to your life. That's a very clean narrative. It's also accurate. Accuracy and legality aren't always the same thing, Rome. No, he said, they're not. But I have two attorneys who specialize in making accurate narratives legally functional. If anything comes back toward you, and I don't believe it will, you have representation already. He held her gaze. I thought about that before I drove to Greystone Heights last night. She finished the last stitch, tied it, set down the needle. She held his bandaged hand between both of hers for a moment without quite knowing why, and then released it. You thought about a lot of things before last night, she said. I think about a lot of things. A beat. Where you're concerned, I've been thinking about a lot of things for a long time. The apartment was quiet. Outside, the rain had finally gentled to almost nothing. A sound like breathing, like the city exhaling after a long night's held tension. She looked at him across the small table, at the bruised eye and the bandaged hand and the coat he'd lost somewhere in the Meridian Tower, and the 15 years of a life built on a foundation of violence and intelligence, and the specific loneliness of a man who had chosen to be untouchable because the alternative was being touched and losing. Why didn't you tell me? She asked. 3 weeks ago, when you found out about Damon. He was quiet for a long moment. Because telling you would have required explaining how I knew, he said, and explaining how I knew would have required telling you that I'd been aware of your existence for the past 6 weeks in ways that... He stopped, looked at the table. I had eyes on Damon's operation, and Damon's operation included you, which meant I had eyes on you. He pressed his lips together. I told myself it was professional, that I was monitoring a compromised civilian connected to a target operation. He looked up. That wasn't all it was. She held his gaze. No, she said. It wasn't. He didn't look away. I should have told you, he said. I should have found a way. The 3 weeks. I built cases for not doing it. Logistics, exposure risk, your reaction, and all of it was true and none of it was the real reason. What was the real reason? A long pause. The specific pause of a man putting down something he'd been carrying for a long time, finding it heavier than he'd assessed while it was still in his hands. Because telling you meant involving you, he said. And every time I've involved people I care about in my world, the outcome has been, His jaw tightened. My brother was 14, he said. The sentence arrived in the room with the weight of everything it contained. Not explained, not expanded, just placed. He was in the wrong place because of me, because of what I was at 19 and what I was building and the enemies that came with it. He looked at his bandaged hand. I've been careful since then about what I let close to me, about who I let close. He looked at her. It's a discipline, a functional one. I know, she said. You're not easy to be careful around. She almost smiled. The specific almost smile that had been occurring all night in the spaces where genuine humor lived next to genuine pain. I've been told I'm difficult, she said. You're not difficult. He held her gaze. You've always been the one thing I couldn't categorize. I can categorize everything. Assets, threats, variables, factors. You've been outside every framework I built because you were built before the frameworks. He looked at her steadily. I don't know what to do with that. Rome, she said quietly. You drove to Greystone Heights in 17 minutes with 6 armed men because I sent you 3 words. Yes, you already know what to do with it. The apartment was very quiet. The rain had stopped entirely. Through the window, the first suggestion of pre-dawn grayness was beginning to differentiate the sky from the rooftops. Cassian appeared in the doorway of the back room, took one look at the table, and said, I'm going to make coffee, and disappeared again with the discretion of a man who had navigated Rome's emotional architecture for years and knew which doors to close. Rome looked at his bandaged hand, looked at Selene. After tonight, he said, there's still a war to finish. Victor is retrenching, but he's not done. Petra may move fast or she may take months. The operation needs... I know, she said. I know your life doesn't stop. I'm not asking you to. I know you're not. She looked at him directly. I'm not 21 anymore, Rome. I'm not standing in a parking garage making accusations in the rain. I understand what you are and what you've built and what it costs." She paused. "And I'm not asking you to be something else. I've spent 3 years with a man who asked me to be something else every single day, and I know what that costs too." She held his gaze. "I'm asking you not to do the careful thing again. The calculated thing. I'm asking you to make the decision you actually want to make and stop building cases for why you shouldn't." He looked at her for a long time. The steady, unreadable look that she'd spent 20 years learning to read anyway, finding the current beneath the surface, the thing that moved below the composure. Then he reached across the table. Not for the drive, not for the first aid kit. He put his unbandaged hand flat on the table, palm up, an open gesture that was the least offended thing she'd seen him do since she was 12 years old, and he handed her half a granola bar through a chain-link fence and didn't say anything about it. She put her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers. Careful. Present. The grip of someone who has decided to stop calculating the distance and simply cross it. They sat like that while Cassian made coffee in the kitchen and the gray pre-dawn light grew slowly through the windows. So, 3 months later, Blackwater City looked different. Not dramatically. Cities didn't transform dramatically. They shifted in increments, small adjustments of pressure, the way a river changes course over years of water finding the path of least resistance. The difference was in texture, in what was no longer present. The Port Authority conducted a series of internal audits that led to 17 resignations and 4 criminal referrals. Nobody outside the institutions involved was told why, and the story that emerged in the press was about financial irregularities rather than weapons trafficking, which was a smaller, more manageable story that the relevant investigators preferred. The Volkov syndicate didn't collapse. Criminal operations of that scale and distribution didn't collapse from a single strike. They contracted, adapted, reorganized. Victor himself went quiet in ways that could mean retreat or preparation, and Cassian spent those 3 months building an intelligence picture of which it was, using contacts Selene never asked about, and information streams she was aware of but didn't monitor. Victor also lost 3 significant city council relationships in the span of 6 weeks, relationships that had been maintained through the kind of financial arrangement that the sudden absence of clean capital made impossible to continue. The details were unremarkable and unconnected. 3 separate council members, each experiencing discrete professional reversals, none of them obviously linked. The pattern was only visible from a specific angle, held in a specific light. Rome held it in that light and said nothing publicly. Petra contacted him at week 11. She came through a clean channel, a lawyer's office on the west side, a meeting that had plausible professional cover. She brought documentation. She brought names. She brought the kind of evidence that transformed from criminal intelligence into federal leverage under the right circumstances. And she sat across from Rome for 40 minutes and negotiated with the quiet precision of a woman who had been building toward this particular exit for longer than anyone had known she was considering it. Rome gave her what she asked for. It wasn't cheap, it wasn't free. But it was, in Cassian's assessment, delivered privately and without editorializing, the best available option given the alternatives. Selene was not in that meeting. She didn't ask what was said. She had returned to work 6 weeks after the night at Greystone Memorial, after her ribs healed and after the hospital's security architecture had been completely rebuilt by an IT firm that arrived with unusual speed and unusual thoroughness and billed their services to a foundation nobody had heard of before. She walked back into the trauma unit on a Tuesday morning, and her colleagues looked at her with the specific quality of attention that people direct towards someone who has been through something they can't ask about. And she looked back at them with the specific quality of attention that said, "I'm here and I'm functional, and that's what matters." And by the end of the shift, the quality of attention had normalized into something closer to ordinary. She opened the Trauma Recovery Center in the 2nd month. It existed on the 3rd floor of a building in the west side that had previously housed a real estate company, and before that a dental practice, and before that nothing useful. The funding came through a community health grant administered by a foundation whose donor list was sealed. The staff were 3 counselors she'd recruited herself and a part-time administrator named Deb, who had survived something she mentioned once and didn't mention again. The first week, 2 women came in. The second week, 5. By the end of the first month, there was a waiting list. Selene ran the intake assessments herself. She sat across from women who looked the way she had looked. The careful posture, the precise language, the eyes that measured exits. And she gave them information that she wished someone had given her. Not advice, not instructions. Information. Here is what is available. Here is what it costs. Here is what I know about the distance between where you are and where you could be. She didn't tell them her story. It wasn't relevant. Her story was hers, and it had a specific shape that wouldn't fit everyone else's space. But her understanding of the architecture of what they'd survived, that was universal enough to be useful. She talked to her mother every Thursday. Her mother had been told, gradually and in manageable portions, that Selene had left a difficult relationship and was rebuilding. Her mother had said, in the specific way of a woman who had watched her daughter for 30 years, "I know it was more than that." And Selene had said, "Yes, but I'm okay." And her mother had held the phone in silence for a moment and then said, "Tell me about the center." And they'd talked for an hour about the women who were coming through the doors and the things they needed and the small bureaucratic victories that made the larger work possible. Rome came to the center once. He parked a block away and walked, no security detail, hands in his coat pockets, and stood on the sidewalk looking at the front door for a moment before coming inside. Selene was at the reception desk reviewing a file. She looked up and found him in the doorway, looking around the space with the expression he wore when he was calibrating something new, reading it the way he read all environments, for exits and variables and pressure points. Then his expression shifted into something else, something quieter. "It's good," he said. "I know," she said. He sat in the waiting area chair while she finished the file. He sat without fidgeting, without checking his phone, with the particular stillness he deployed when he was somewhere he'd chosen to be and wasn't calculating exit strategies. After a while, Deb came out of the back and looked at him with the expression of a woman taking a professional reading, and he met her eyes with the expression of a man accepting the assessment, and some silent negotiation concluded itself without either of them speaking. When Selene finished the file, she got her coat. They walked. The West Side in late winter had a quality she'd always liked. The stripped trees, the low gray sky, the particular smell of cold air moving through a city that hadn't finished deciding what it wanted to be. They walked without a destination for a while, past the coffee shop that had been there since the neighborhood was different, past the park where the benches were still waterlogged from the previous week's rain. "Victor moved something last Tuesday," Rome said. "I know, Cassian told me." He glanced at her. "Cassian told you." "Cassian and I have breakfast sometimes. Is that a problem?" He looked forward again. "No." "He's worried about the move." "He's worried about everything. It's his primary mode." He paused. "He's not wrong to be worried about this specific thing, but it's manageable." Another pause. "I'll manage it." She looked at him walking beside her, at the healed hand, at the fading bruise that had been at his eye, now almost invisible. The skin returned to its normal terrain. At the coat he'd replaced, not identical to the one he'd lost, this one slightly different, and she found she had an opinion about the collar that she kept to herself. "Are you going to tell me what Petra gave you?" she asked. A beat. "Are you going to use it for anything?" "No." "Then probably not." He glanced at her again. "Not because I don't trust you with it, because some of it is ugly and you already know enough ugly things about the world." "Rome," she said, "I run a trauma recovery center. I am professionally saturated in ugly things." "These are uglier." She considered that. "Okay." They walked past the park. "The financial transfer," she said. "The hospital's infrastructure fund. I saw the equipment they brought in last month. They replaced the entire ER imaging system." She paused. "I didn't say anything to anyone at work about where it came from." "Good. But I know. I know you know." She was quiet for a moment. "Does it help, the knowing?" He took his time with that, the kind of time that meant he was treating the question with the seriousness it deserved rather than offering the reflexive answer. "It helps the way anything helps," he said finally, "which is partially and imperfectly and not as much as you want it to at first." He looked at the dead trees in the park, the bare branches against the gray sky. "I've been in this city for 15 years. I've done things in it that I can't account for in any framework that would satisfy a reasonable person. I can't undo them. I can't. The math doesn't balance, like you said." A pause. So I do what I can with what's available, in the direction of better, and I don't perform more certainty about it than I have. She thought about that for a while. That's the most honest thing you've ever said to me, she said. I'm trying to be more honest. He said it without inflation. It's a discipline, slower than the other kind. She stopped walking. He stopped a half step later and turned to face her on the sidewalk, and she looked at him in the flat winter light and saw all the layers she'd been looking through for 20 years. The careful man, the dangerous man, the man who showed up in 17 minutes, the man who'd sat in a hospital waiting room when his brother died and not cried, the man who'd said you can't in a parking garage because he meant, I can't let myself, all of it present and unresolved and real in a way that wasn't clean and wasn't simple and was, she had decided, enough. I'm not going anywhere, she said, in case you're still building a case for why I should. He looked at her. For a moment, he looked exactly like the boy on the rooftop, the one who never smiled but always showed up. Then he looked like what he was, 31 years old, alive in a city that had been trying to kill him since he was 19, standing on a sidewalk in the cold with a woman who had decided to stop being managed. He reached out and tucked her hair back from her face, a small, unhurried gesture, his thumb resting briefly at her temple the way it had in the study at 3 a.m. Okay, he said. Not a performance, not a promise designed to accomplish something, just the word, placed simply between them, meaning exactly what it said. They kept walking. Behind them, the city continued its imperfect, incremental work of becoming something other than what it had been. The streets were not clean. The people in them carried histories that didn't resolve neatly. The structures of power that had bent Blackwater City toward darkness for decades did not simply stop existing because one node in one network had been disrupted. But 2 women had come through Selene's intake that morning, and 5 had appointments next week, and the woman who ran the desk had survived something she'd mentioned once, and didn't mention again and came in every morning because she'd decided that showing up was its own form of argument against everything that had happened to her. And in the port district, 3 shipping contracts that had been facilitating something they shouldn't have been facilitating had quietly expired and not been renewed. And in a federal prosecutor's office downtown, a sealed file sat in a cabinet that would be opened in approximately 4 months when the circumstances were correctly aligned, containing information provided by a source who was never named, documenting a pattern of activity that would take 18 months to prosecute and result in convictions that the press would cover as a victory for institutional accountability rather than as what it actually was. None of it was the end of anything. Nothing ended cleanly. The world didn't work that way, and Selene had stopped expecting it to somewhere around the second week of running intake assessments and finding that the women who came through her door were not looking for endings. They were looking for the particular kind of beginning that became available once you understood that the worst thing had already happened, and you were still here. She was still here. Rome's hand found hers as they walked, his fingers fitting against hers with the ease of something that had always been going to happen and had simply taken its time arriving. She held on. The city moved around them in its ordinary, flawed, irreducible life. Morning traffic and construction noise and the smell of coffee from a shop they passed without stopping. And above it all, the winter sky sat gray and specific and indifferent and real. Not beautiful, not healed, just present. Which was, she had learned, the only place anything actually happened.